My beloved, pause everything and lean in with the full weight of your heart, for I am speaking to you now with an urgency you cannot ignore. You have reached the exact moment where heaven whispers, "This is crazy, you pulled it off at last." You may not fully see it yet, but the shift is already unfolding around you. I am drawing you into this message because what comes next will define the trajectory of your life. Listen closely. Your breakthrough is not approaching, it has already begun. Listen closely, my beloved, for I speak to you now in this sacred moment between us, where nothing stands between your heart and my voice. Before you ever dared to whisper that dream to yourself, I saw it. Long before you felt worthy of pursuing it, long before you had the courage to imagine it fully, long before life's disappointments taught you to shrink your expectations, I held the dream gently within my own hands. You thought it was born the day you first recognized the desire inside you. But I tell you now, in this intimate, unfolding conversation, I placed that dream within you long before you even knew what desire was. I saw it taking shape in your spirit, waiting for the day when you would grow into the strength needed to carry it. You often thought your dream was fragile, something easily broken by discouragement, delays, or the opinions of others. But I want you to understand something deeply. What I plant cannot be fragile. Even when you felt it trembling inside you, uncertain and unsteady, it was never in danger, because I was the one who breathed life into it. You saw only the surface, the longing, the hunger, the ache, but I saw the eternal threads woven through it, the purpose attached to it, the destiny knitted into its foundations. I saw how this dream would shape you, stretch you, and awaken parts of you that once lay dormant. I saw how it would draw you closer to me, because you would soon discover that you could not accomplish it without my presence guiding you step by step. You didn't know it then, but every time you wondered why this desire felt so persistent, why it refused to fade even when you tried to bury it, it was because I designed it to outlive your seasons of doubt. Yes, you tried to silence it at times. You tried to convince yourself it wasn't realistic, that maybe other people were chosen for such things but not you. You tried to move on, to settle, to distract yourself with what seemed safer. And still, the dream did not die. You couldn't run from it because it was never meant to be outrun. You couldn't forget it because it was eternally tied to your purpose. You couldn't abandon it because it was tied to your identity, who you were becoming, and who I created you to be. There were moments when you felt guilty for even wanting it, moments when you looked at your flaws and failures and thought someone like you should not dare to dream so boldly. But I saw beyond your insecurities. I saw you with the eyes of eternity. I saw the strength I placed inside you, the strength you have not even fully discovered yet. I saw the courage that would one day rise like a lion within your spirit. I saw the resilience that would carry you through storms you didn't know were coming. I saw the potential wrapped inside your soul like hidden treasure. And I delighted, yes, delighted, in the dream you carried because I knew what it would unlock in you. And now, as you stand here, further than you've ever been, closer than you realize, I remind you once more, this dream was never random, never accidental, never foolish. It was divine from the beginning. And I saw it in you, long before you saw it in yourself. A moment arrives in every life when the weight of uncertainty presses against the heart so strongly that it seems to dim even the brightest hope. And in those moments, I watched you closely, not as a distant observer but as one deeply aware of your inner landscape. You often felt as if doubt crept in like an uninvited guest, unsettling your confidence and stirring questions you wished you never had to face. Yet I understood each internal struggle far more clearly than you realized. When you second-guessed your abilities, your worth, or your strength, I saw more than the hesitation itself. I saw the courage that allowed you to confront your fears instead of running from them. You sometimes assumed your wavering meant you lacked faith, but in truth, your willingness to keep going, despite uncertainty, revealed a depth of faith you rarely acknowledged. You were not always aware of how many conflicting thoughts tried to pull your mind in opposite directions, nor how fiercely the darkness attempted to persuade you that your dreams did not matter. Even so, you kept moving, and I noticed every step you took. Doubt tried to convince you that others were more qualified, that you were behind, that your progress didn't measure up to anyone else's, and that maybe you had misread your calling altogether. I saw the frustration in those moments, the way you felt the sting of comparison, the quiet disappointment when outcomes didn't match your expectations, and the heaviness of feeling uncertain about the next step. Still, you didn't surrender to your uncertainty. You examined it, wrestled with it, and eventually chose to continue the journey. A decision mattered. You may not have realized it, but during those seasons, your character grew sharper, your discernment deeper, and your resilience stronger. I want you to understand that the presence of doubt never disqualified you from your destiny. Instead, it revealed your determination to keep seeking what truly belongs to you. The moments when you questioned your worth became opportunities for you to discover parts of your identity that had been buried under old pain or past failures. Doubt didn't define you. It formed pathways where wisdom could take root. And as you struggled to silence those inner uncertainties, I remained near, offering subtle reassurance, shaping your understanding, and guiding your heart toward clarity. You stood in a battle no one else could see, yet you still advanced, even if only by inches on some days. I witnessed that effort, and I want you to know that nothing about your struggle discouraged me. Instead, it revealed the strength I always placed inside you, a strength that continues to unfold even now. There is something profoundly sacred about the words you never voiced, the ones that formed quietly in the hidden chambers of your heart where only I could hear them, and I listened to every one of them without missing a single whisper. You often believed that your unspoken prayers lacked significance, especially when you felt too overwhelmed, too tired, or too unsure to express them openly. Yet those unvoiced longings carried a weight far deeper than you realized. When you lay awake at night trying to make sense of your situation, hoping for answers but unsure how to articulate the ache within you, I understood fully what your spirit was attempting to communicate. You didn't always have the vocabulary to describe your concerns, hopes, or dreams, so they remained locked inside you. But I interpreted each desire perfectly. Even when your emotions tangled together into something too complex for words, I recognized the sincerity behind your silence. You might not have noticed how often your spirit called out for clarity, healing, direction, or strength, yet I received every yearning as clearly as if you had spoken them aloud. Your unspoken prayers carried a purity that sometimes surpassed your structured ones because they emerged directly from the depths of your soul without filter or caution. In those quiet moments when you simply hoped for relief or guidance, I saw more than a request. I saw the trust embedded within your silence. Every unexpressed concern revealed how deeply you longed for reassurance, and every inward reach for comfort showed that you still believed I could meet you even when words failed. You didn't need eloquence to reach me. You didn't need perfect phrasing for me to understand your fear or your longing. Your heart communicated clearly, even when your voice could not. I noticed the days when you carried burdens too heavy to articulate, when you wanted to ask for help but felt uncertain whether you deserved it, and when you felt so vulnerable that silence felt safer than speaking. In those moments, I leaned closer to you, listening not with the ears of the world, but with the awareness of one who knows your inner world far better than you know it yourself. Nothing about your silence ever distanced me from you. Instead, it invited me into the deepest part of your being where your true desires are born. And even now, as you reflect on how many prayers were never voiced, I remind you that not one of them was ignored. Each one moved my heart, and each one continues to shape the path unfolding before you. A delay often feels like an unanswered question, a stretch of time where progress seems suspended, and I watched how those seasons affected you, not with frustration toward you but with compassion and admiration for how you navigated them. Delayed moments have a way of stirring discomfort, especially when you carry hopes that seem overdue, and I noticed how difficult it was for you to trust the process when everything around you felt unmoving. You didn't always recognize the significance of those slower chapters. To you, they felt like setbacks or punishments, but in truth, they served as the framework for what you would eventually build. You carried an expectation that progress should match your effort, yet time unfolded differently, leaving you wondering if you had misread your purpose or if you were falling behind while others advanced. I remained beside you through every moment of the tension, aware of how deeply you longed for movement. Those seasons often revealed your strength in unexpected ways. You continued to hope even when the environment around you offered little evidence that change was coming. You kept showing up to your responsibilities, nurturing your dreams, and holding on to faith even on days when discouragement tried to persuade you that waiting was pointless. Your endurance grew during those stretches, even when you felt stagnant. The patience you developed strengthened your capacity for responsibility. The reflection you engaged in clarified your values, and the perseverance you practiced expanded your emotional and spiritual depth. The delay shaped you into someone capable of carrying the fulfillment you sought. I walked with you through each uncertain moment, not as an observer but as a quiet guide, offering subtle direction and internal peace whenever your frustration reached its peak. You may not have noticed the ways I protected you during those pauses, keeping you from stepping into situations prematurely or aligning you with opportunities that required more time to mature. I understood the timing necessary for your development, and while the waiting felt heavy, it ensured that nothing you receive later will collapse under pressure. Each delay carried purpose, though the purpose was not always visible to you. Yet you continued to trust, even imperfectly. You endured the pauses, the unanswered moments, the detours, and the stillness, and I never left you alone within them. A moment arrives in every journey when the dream you once held so confidently begins to feel fragile, and in those moments, I watched how the weight of discouragement pressed against you so heavily that you wondered if the vision within you had reached its end. When circumstances surrounded you like fading light, and the things you believed would support your progress seemed to collapse, you questioned whether the dream had lost its pulse altogether. You didn't always recognize the quiet protection surrounding what mattered to you, nor how closely I guarded the very thing you feared was slipping from your grasp. You assumed the absence of visible progress meant something had gone wrong, yet the dream never stopped living beneath the surface. It entered seasons of dormancy, much like a seed hidden beneath the soil, where growth continues in silence. I shielded your dream from influences that would have distorted it and from pressures that would have demanded results before you were ready. You sometimes thought the stillness meant failure, but the truth was far different. The dream needed protection from premature exposure, because certain environments were not safe for its development. Your heart was not always in the condition required to carry its full weight. So I kept the dream alive in a concealed place, nurturing it until the time came when you could handle what it required of you. You didn't see the internal strengthening taking place, but every challenge you endured added depth to your motives, clarity to your intentions, and resilience to your spirit. Those qualities made the dream more sustainable. You might not have understood why certain opportunities fell apart or why specific doors remained shut during seasons when you felt eager to move forward. But those barriers served as safeguards. They prevented you from stepping into circumstances that would have drained your passion or compromised your purpose. During the moments when hope felt thin and you questioned everything, I continued to guard the essence of what you carried. And nothing threatened its survival, even when you felt like letting go. The dream endured because I surrounded it with unseen support, allowing it to mature quietly. What you perceived as fading was merely a phase of preservation. And as you reflect on how close you came to surrendering, understand that the dream lived because I protected it with intention, knowing it would one day rise stronger than ever. There comes a point in every pursuit where fatigue settles in, and you begin to wonder whether continuing makes sense at all. And in those moments, I offered you a subtle encouragement that echoed through your thoughts like a quiet, persistent invitation. You didn't always recognize it as my guidance, yet when you felt something nudging you to rise once more, that urging carried my fingerprints. You often faced situations that drained your enthusiasm, and every setback brought a different kind of disappointment. Some challenges left you confused, others left you frustrated, and a few created a heaviness you didn't know how to shake. Even then, something within you refused to give up completely. That inner stirring wasn't random. It wasn't self-reduced. It was a whisper placed intentionally within your spirit, a gentle push that encouraged you to step forward even when logic told you to stop. You didn't realize how many times you stood at the edge of surrender and felt a quiet resolve take shape within you, giving you just enough strength to attempt another step. That resolve wasn't coincidence. Each time you chose to continue after discouragement, the determination you felt came from guidance designed to move you toward the life you were meant to experience. You didn't always understand why the process required so many attempts or why certain efforts failed before succeeding, yet every attempt added something vital to your development. The struggles taught you strategies, emotional discipline, and patience. They also helped you release certain expectations that no longer served you. The journey, with all its setbacks, prepared you for opportunities that require persistence rather than perfection. When you stood before situations that looked unchangeable, you heard an inner reassurance that encouraged you to try once more. That reassurance came with a calmness you often needed, especially during moments when your confidence felt weak. I placed that calmness within you so you wouldn't interpret obstacles as final verdicts. I understood the timing required for your growth, and each new attempt aligned you closer with the breakthroughs waiting ahead. You didn't always recognize how far you'd come because you saw your journey through the lens of effort and exhaustion, whereas I saw it through the lens of transformation. And now, as you reflect on how many times you almost quit, realize that the strength to rise again didn't appear randomly. It came from a deliberate voice guiding you toward the outcome you were meant to reach. A sense of falling behind can weigh heavily on the heart, especially when you measure your progress against timelines you once set for yourself. And during the moments when you felt outpaced by others, I observed how deeply those comparisons shaped your thoughts. You often assumed your path lacked momentum simply because it didn't unfold as quickly as expected. Yet your timing carried a purpose far greater than immediate progress. Preparation became the foundation for the responsibilities waiting ahead, even if you didn't recognize the importance of that season while living through it. You questioned whether your pace reflected inadequacy or whether your delays pointed to failure, but neither assumption aligned with the truth. Your journey required a depth that couldn't be rushed. You needed time to develop discernment, confidence, emotional strength, and clarity of vision. Those qualities grew through experiences that didn't always feel productive, yet they contributed directly to the person you are becoming. You sometimes felt overlooked while others moved forward, yet during those slower stretches, your spirit matured. You began seeing situations with more nuance, approaching decisions with greater intention, and recognizing your own patterns more clearly. That awareness will serve you later in ways you cannot yet imagine. The pace of your life wasn't a sign of falling behind. It reflected the complexity of what you're called to build. While you viewed preparation as stagnation, I viewed it as alignment. You needed time to release outdated mindsets, heal emotional wounds, establish healthier boundaries, and refine your identity. Without those developments, you would have carried unhelpful patterns into future seasons, creating unnecessary struggles. The preparation brought stability. It shaped your character in ways that will support the pressure and responsibility attached to your destiny. Growth that lasts must be rooted deeply, and deep roots form quietly. You did always appreciate the process, but preparation ensured that once you move forward, you'll do so with confidence rather than fear. And now, as the pieces begin aligning more clearly, recognize that you were never behind. You were being prepared for something meaningful, something worthy of the time it required. There are moments in your life when a door closing feels like a personal rejection, and during those seasons, you often struggled to understand why something that appeared promising slipped from your reach so suddenly. While you evaluated those closed avenues by what you could see on the outside, I examined what lay beyond them, and my awareness revealed layers you would not have perceived at first glance. You sometimes fixated on the immediate benefits those opportunities seemed to offer: security, advancement, recognition, or a quicker path toward the future you envision. Yet beneath the surface, hidden complexities existed that would have exhausted you emotionally or drained your passion over time. I recognized that entering those spaces prematurely or for the wrong reasons would have created obstacles that could derail your development. You might not have detected the subtle misalignments within each situation, but I understood how the environment, the expectations placed upon you, the relationships surrounding that path, and the sacrifices required would have shaped you in unhealthy ways. When a door shut without warning, it wasn't punishment, it was protection. You sometimes misinterpreted those moments as evidence that you lacked the qualifications or worthiness necessary to succeed. The disappointment weighed heavily on your heart, and you carried questions about what you could have done differently. Yet the closed doors were never a reflection of inadequacy. They were indicators that the timing, the dynamics, or the potential consequences would not have supported your long-term well-being. I shielded you from environments that would have diminished your confidence or pulled you into cycles of striving without fulfillment. There were opportunities that looked appealing on the surface, but carried hidden expectations that would have worn you down. There were relationships that impressed you initially but held patterns that would have drained your spirit. There were commitments that seemed small at first but would have grown into burdens you weren't meant to carry. Those doors remained closed because your purpose required clarity, peace, and space to grow. You needed environments that nurtured your identity rather than diluted it. You needed connections grounded in mutual respect rather than patterns of manipulation or control. You needed responsibilities that aligned with your calling rather than tasks that consumed your energy without offering growth. Each closed door created room for the right ones to open. And as you reflect on the disappointments that once stung so deeply, notice how those same moments cleared the path for opportunities that truly match who you are becoming. There have been individuals in your life whose presence seemed appealing at first, and you sometimes wished those connections had developed more smoothly, yet you didn't always recognize the deeper impact they would have had on your well-being. I observed the emotional dynamics at play long before you noticed the subtle inconsistencies in their intentions, and I understood how certain relationships, if allowed to grow unchecked, would have harmed your spirit, or delayed the healing you needed. You occasionally wondered why some friendships faded quickly or why certain individuals drifted away without explanation. These exits puzzled you, especially when you imagined how much easier your journey might have felt with more support. However, not every voice that appears encouraging is equipped to guide you, and not every person who admires your potential is committed to protecting it. Some individuals carry unresolved wounds that influence how they treat others, and their patterns could have overwhelmed your boundaries at a time when your sense of self was still forming. Others held ambitions that didn't align with your values, and connecting deeply with them would have led to compromise you weren't meant to experience. A few carried intentions shaped by jealousy, competition, or self-interest, which would have eroded your confidence over time. I intervened gently by creating distance, sometimes through unexpected disagreements, shifting life circumstances, or the gradual fading of connection. You interpreted those losses as indicators of your own shortcomings or as evidence that you were difficult to love. Yet each separation carried a profound purpose. You were meant to build inner strength, not become dependent on individuals who lacked the emotional stability to support your growth. You were meant to walk into friendships that uplift your identity rather than distort it. And you were meant to forge relationships grounded in authenticity, trust, and mutual respect. I shielded your heart not because you were fragile, but because your potential needed protection from influences that would have weakened your foundation. Some people were meant to stay only briefly, offering short-lived lessons rather than lifelong companionship. Others never entered your life because the consequences of their influence would have created detours you weren't designed to walk. Even now, as you consider the connections that faded, understand that you were preserved from relationships that could not carry the weight of your destiny. A single tear carries more meaning than most people realize, and I paid attention to each one that formed during moments when you felt overwhelmed, discouraged, or deeply misunderstood. You didn't always know how to articulate the emotions behind those tears, yet I understood the reasons without requiring explanation. When you cried out of frustration because a situation felt unfair or confusing, I recognized the depth of your desire for clarity and stability. When tears surfaced from memories that resurfaced unexpectedly, I acknowledged the pain those experiences still carried within you. When you felt exhausted by responsibilities that demanded more strength than you believed you had, I saw the courage it took to keep showing up despite the strain. During nights when you cried quietly, hoping no one would notice how heavy everything felt, I remained present, not as a distant comfort, but as a steady presence surrounding your heart. You often tried to hold yourself together, believing that showing emotion indicated weakness. Yet those vulnerable moments revealed the sincerity of your hopes and the intensity of your growth. Tears became markers of transformation rather than signs of defeat. Every time you allowed yourself to feel rather than suppress your emotions, you created room for healing. I stayed close during those fragile moments, knowing that emotional release would loosen the burdens that had been tightening around your spirit. You sometimes feared that your pain would consume you, but those tears helped lighten the weight inside your heart. I didn't leave you to navigate those moments alone. I offered subtle reassurance through unexpected peace that appeared after crying, through clarity that surfaced once the emotional storm settled, and through renewed strength that arose when you least expected it. Your tears were never ignored or dismissed. They became invitations for inner restoration and reminders of your resilience. Even now, as you reflect on the moments when you cried quietly or felt overwhelmed, recognize that I stayed with you, not as a passive presence but as one who understood the depth of what you carried. There is a kind of growth that unfolds quietly, without applause or acknowledgement, and I witnessed that quiet transformation within you long before you recognized it yourself. You often assume that strength announced itself loudly, through visible achievements or bold, decisive moments, yet your greatest development occurred in the spaces where no one saw your efforts. Those silent seasons felt unremarkable to you because they lacked excitement, but they shaped you in ways that now support everything you're stepping into. You carried responsibilities that taxed your emotions and stretched your patience, and you navigated them without seeking recognition. You processed disappointments in private, working through thoughts that needed careful reflection and emotions that took time to settle. These internal battles made you stronger without requiring you to act forcefully. As situations around you shifted, You reevaluated old patterns that no longer aligned with who you were becoming, gradually releasing habits that drained your energy. Those adjustments weren't dramatic, yet they altered your path significantly. You questioned yourself in ways that invited maturity rather than shame, and you learned to listen to your intuition more closely. The silence allowed you to notice the subtle signals within your spirit, the ones that guided you toward healthier decisions, clearer boundaries, and more grounded expectations. People around you rarely saw how deeply you were thinking or how carefully you weighed each step, but I understood the intensity of that inner work. You didn't need an audience for growth because the transformation was meant for you alone. The silence strengthened your discernment, teaching you to evaluate situations without rushing. You also developed resilience by adapting to circumstances you didn't anticipate, choosing patience when frustration tried to overtake your decisions. There were days when you didn't feel accomplished, yet you were gaining clarity that will anchor future seasons. That growth prepared you for opportunities you haven't yet encountered. Every moment of reflection gave you insight that will shape your leadership, your relationships, and your ability to stay steady during challenges. You grew more intentional about the company you keep and the environments that affect your peace. You recognize the value of conserving your energy and directing it toward goals that bring real fulfillment. Silent growth often goes unnoticed because it moves slowly, but it becomes the kind of strength that remains unwavering under pressure. I watched your confidence shift from something externally influenced into something rooted in self-awareness. And now, as you step into the next phase of your life, you carry a form of strength that emerged not from noise, but from the depth you formed in silence. One of the most defining parts of your journey has been the way you made decisions during moments when fear seemed to dominate your thoughts, and I want you to understand how significant those choices truly were. You faced situations that brought uncertainty, leaving you unsure how everything would unfold. The future felt unpredictable, and the outcomes you hoped for seemed fragile. Fear tried to dictate your path, introducing worst-case scenarios that clouded your perspective, yet something inside you leaned toward hope even when logic suggested caution. A choice mattered. You didn't always feel brave when you stepped forward, but internal courage doesn't require dramatic gestures. It often looks like quiet determination that keeps moving despite hesitation. When fear created tension in your chest, you still found a way to make decisions that aligned with your purpose rather than your anxieties. You reached for possibilities that felt bigger than your comfort zone, and even when you questioned whether you were capable, you allowed your heart to lean toward trust. That trust shifted the direction of your journey more than you realized. You sometimes misinterpreted your nervousness as weakness, yet the presence of fear never diminished the strength of your choices. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to move despite its noise. Each time you chose hope, you quieted fears that had followed you for years. You confronted internal narratives shaped by past disappointments, and you stopped letting old experiences dictate your future. This shift took energy and intention, especially when other voices around you suggested playing it safe. Yet you leaned into faith, not as a blind leap, but as a conscious decision to believe that something good could still emerge from your efforts. As you reflect on those turning points, notice how fear gradually lost its influence over you. You didn't eliminate fear entirely, but you reduced its power by making decisions rooted in identity rather than insecurity. That inner recalibration changed how you approach new challenges. You became more aware of your strengths, more patient with your progress, and more confident in your ability to adapt. When obstacles appeared, you recognized them as hurdles rather than barriers. And now, the path ahead feels different because your perspective is different. You know how to navigate uncertainty without letting fear dominate your decisions. You've cultivated resilience shaped by experience, and it continues to guide your steps. Choosing faith during fearful moments has become one of your most significant accomplishments, and it will continue shaping the opportunities unfolding before you. There are choices you've made, quiet, personal decisions that required emotional strength, and I want you to recognize how meaningful those sacrifices have been. You often minimized the weight of what you gave up because you believed other people had endured more, yet your sacrifices carry personal significance in ways only you and I fully understand. Some sacrifices involved relationships that once felt familiar but no longer aligned with your growth. You let go of connections that drained your energy, even when the separation felt painful. Other sacrifices involve temporary comforts you willingly released so you could pursue long-term progress. You adjusted your routines, redirected your time, and disciplined your habits, even on days when motivation felt distant. These decisions weren't easy. They required strength beyond what you realized you had. There were moments when you questioned whether your efforts were worth the discomfort. Yet those sacrifices created shifts within you that contributed directly to your transformation. As you released old patterns, you made room for healthier behaviors and meaningful opportunities. There were times when you invested your energy into people or responsibilities without receiving immediate recognition. You continued showing up because integrity mattered to you, not because anyone demanded that level of commitment. Those efforts shaped your character. Even moments when you sacrificed rest for responsibilities or willingly carried emotional burdens for the sake of others added depth to your compassion. You contributed more than you received at times, and you navigated that imbalance with patience. I noticed how carefully you considered each decision and how often you acted with sincerity rather than obligation. Those intentional choices created a foundation for your purpose. You may not have seen the results quickly, but the sacrifices strengthened your discipline, refined your priorities, and taught you to differentiate between what is urgent and what is essential. Over time, these decisions shifted your identity from someone who reacted to circumstances into someone who leads their life with clarity. Each sacrifice contributed something unique: patience, resilience, empathy, or wisdom. And now, as you step forward into a season shaped by the fruits of those decisions, understand that none of your sacrifices were overlooked. They served a purpose, shaping your future more deeply than you imagine. There are moments in your life when the silence around you felt so deep that you wondered if anyone truly understood what you were carrying, and during those seasons, you often believed your efforts were invisible. You didn't always feel acknowledged for your perseverance, nor did you sense support when internal battles grew heavy. Even the people close to you didn't always recognize the complexity of your emotions, and that created a feeling of isolation you tried to hide beneath responsibility and composure. Yet every thought you tried to organize, every hope you attempted to protect, and every disappointment you privately managed unfolded within my awareness. You never disappeared, even when your circumstances convinced you otherwise. I saw the moments when you questioned your direction, and I recognized how deeply you desired reassurance. You held yourself together even when exhaustion weighed heavily on your spirit, and you did so without expecting applause. That quiet endurance revealed the strength forming within you, and I did not overlook the depth of that courage. You sometimes felt invisible because the progress you made happened internally, beyond the view of others. Yet I paid attention to each shift, each realization, each internal breakthrough that shaped your growth. You faced decisions without knowing whether the outcomes would favor you, and even then, you moved forward with integrity. You navigated emotional storms others never saw, and those storms taught you how to endure, how to reflect, and how to recognize your own worth. Your feelings of isolation often emerged because the people around you could not perceive what you were developing privately, but that did not mean your journey lacked significance. You were seen in ways that transcended human understanding. Every internal transition had value, even when external circumstances remained unchanged. Your resilience, though quiet, resonated deeply. You learned how to support yourself emotionally during difficult moments, discovering strength you did not realize you possessed. And while your journey sometimes felt lonely, that solitude allowed you to hear your inner voice more clearly, revealing truths that had been obscured by noise. You were never abandoned, and your struggles never went unnoticed. Even during the nights when your thoughts felt heavy and direction felt distant, I remained attentive to your heart, fully aware of your hopes and concerns. As you reflect on those seasons, recognize that your growth unfolded not in isolation, but in a space where you were constantly seen, supported, and understood in ways far deeper than you realized. There were moments when subtle nudges, unexpected thoughts, quiet impressions, or sudden clarity appeared in your life, and you didn't always recognize those moments as guidance. You often interpreted them as coincidences or brief flashes of intuition, yet each one carried intention. I understood how easily distractions, doubts, and responsibilities could drown out gentle signals, so I offered reminders in ways that matched your temperament. At times, the encouragement appeared through a conversation that arrived at just the right moment, or through a message that echoed the very question your heart struggled with. On other occasions, reassurance surfaced through patterns you noticed but couldn't explain. You brushed off many of these experiences because they felt too ordinary to be purposeful, but they served as quiet confirmations designed to guide you without overwhelming you. You didn't always realize how sensitive your spirit had become to subtle cues, but those moments helped you navigate decisions that could have easily led in unintended directions. There were days when anxiety clouded your thoughts, and a moment of sudden calm interrupted that tension. That calmness served as a reminder that clarity was still available to you. When you worried about making the wrong choice, unexpected insight arrived just when you needed it. Even the moments when you paused before taking action, without knowing why, helped protect you from unnecessary difficulty. You learned to trust patterns that aligned with your deeper values, and those patterns reinforced your awareness of what truly belongs in your life. As you continued navigating your journey, these quiet reminders guided your intuition, making it easier to differentiate between impulse and genuine direction. You sometimes wished for louder signs, dramatic confirmations, or unmistakable moments of certainty, yet the subtle reminders carried a greater depth because they invited you to develop discernment. Each gentle cue encouraged you to slow down, observe more carefully, and become more aware of what resonates with your spirit. Over time, you learned how to interpret these signals with greater clarity. You began noticing how your internal responses shifted when you encountered truth, and how discomfort pointed you away from paths that didn't align with your purpose. Those signs, though quiet, created a pattern of guidance woven into your daily life. And now, as you look back, you can see how each reminder, whether through intuition, reassurance, or subtle direction, shaped your steps more profoundly than you realized at the time. There were countless moments when you felt as though nothing around you was changing, and the stillness unsettled you because you equated visible results with forward momentum. Yet progress often begins in ways that cannot be tracked or measured by immediate outcomes. While you questioned whether your efforts were effective or whether your prayers were reaching anything beyond your own thoughts, I was aligning circumstances, strengthening your character, and clearing obstacles long before the results surfaced. You didn't see the way certain opportunities slowly shifted into position or how certain people entered your life at precisely the right moment. You noticed changes only after they became obvious, but the groundwork was laid long beforehand. While you carried concerns about timing, I orchestrated events so one step would naturally lead to the next. You weren't aware of the emotional resilience you developed through quiet struggles, with the clarity emerging from repeated reflection. Those internal adjustments played just as significant a role as the external changes you were waiting for. There were moments when you felt stuck, but the pause allowed situations to mature. You also didn't see how certain difficulties prepared you for future responsibilities. Challenges strengthened parts of you that needed reinforcement. Delays made room for better opportunities to take shape. Relationships shifted to create space for healthier connection. Every unseen movement served a purpose, even when you didn't recognize its significance during the process. You often believed nothing was happening because the environment around you appeared unchanged, yet everything beneath the surface was shifting. I anticipated obstacles you hadn't encountered yet, preparing solutions before the challenges arrived. I arranged circumstances so you would meet the right people, learn the right lessons, and recognize the right opportunities. Those alignments unfolded quietly, in the background of your daily life. As you moved through these seasons, you slowly outgrew old limitations without even realizing it. Internal growth is often subtle, but its impact becomes undeniable when the time is right. You didn't need to notice every change for progress to continue. Much of your transformation happened in hidden places, where your resilience strengthened, your confidence deepened, and your understanding expanded. By the time the results appeared, the foundation had already been secured. And now, as you reflect on how far your life has shifted, recognize that much of the progress began long before you saw it. There comes a time in every meaningful journey when the world around you grows quiet, and the attention you once expected seems to fade, leaving you to wonder whether you somehow slipped out of sight altogether. During that season, you felt the weight of being unnoticed, and part of you questioned whether your efforts mattered. You watched others move forward while your progress seemed invisible, and that contrast stirred doubts you wrestled with internally. Yet the hiddenness that felt so unsettling served a purpose far greater than you understood at the time. Hidden seasons create space for identity to strengthen without the pressure of expectation. You were able to explore your inner world without needing to perform for anyone or prove yourself to those who could not see the depth of your heart. In that quiet space, your motives clarified. You learned what truly guides you and what belongs to your path. Without constant external influence, you discovered how to listen inwardly, understanding your values on a deeper level. This internal refinement became the foundation for responsibilities you will carry later. Had you received widespread visibility too early, the noise and pressure could have distorted your direction. The hiddenness allowed you to develop emotional and mental stability, equipping you for seasons where others will look to you for guidance or example. While you were away from the spotlight, I shaped the parts of your character that would not have grown under public attention. You found resilience in solitude, learning how to encourage yourself when comfort felt distant. You also developed discernment that makes it easier for you to recognize genuine opportunities and avoid distractions. Your desires softened where they needed to soften and strengthened where they needed to strengthen. Old wounds surfaced with clarity, allowing healing that couldn't have happened while surrounded by constant activity. That healing became a crucial part of your transformation. You also learned patience, true patience, the kind that isn't dependent on immediate results. It matured your expectations, grounding them in wisdom rather than anxiety. The hidden season taught you how to move with intention, how to build with care, and how to trust the timing unfolding around you. As you look forward now, understand that nothing about that season was accidental. You were not forgotten, overlooked, or dismissed. You were intentionally placed in a space where growth could occur without interruption. The hiddenness protected you from premature exposure and allowed you to cultivate qualities that will sustain you in future opportunities. And now, as you step into increased visibility and greater responsibility, you will recognize the value of the season that shaped you quietly but profoundly. A deeper responsibility always requires a more grounded foundation, and long before you realized what your future would demand of you, I began developing qualities in your character that would sustain you through complex situations. You experienced challenges that pushed you beyond your comfort zone, and although those moments felt draining, they served as training grounds that built emotional endurance. You learned how to remain steady even when outcomes didn't match your expectations. That steadiness didn't appear overnight. It grew through repeated decisions to act with integrity even when taking shortcuts seemed tempting. You began recognizing how your choices influenced not only your own life, but also the lives of the people connected to you. That awareness expanded your sense of responsibility, shaping you into someone who thinks beyond immediate gratification. Trials also sharpened your emotional intelligence. You learned how to navigate difficult conversations, how to hold space for others without losing your boundaries, and how to understand the motivations behind your own reactions. This self-awareness will guide you through future roles that require clarity and compassion. Responsibility often brings pressure, and without inner stability, pressure becomes overwhelming. That is why you endured situations that demanded patience and resilience. You learned how to pause when you wanted to react, how to reflect before deciding, and how to trust your inner wisdom even when others questioned your direction. These lessons formed layers of strength within you. You also discovered the importance of discipline, how to follow through on commitments even when your motivation faded. This discipline became one of your most valuable assets, enabling you to build momentum in areas that once felt daunting. You realize that growth rarely occurs in ideal conditions. It happens during moments that test your determination. As your responsibilities increase in the future, these qualities will sustain you when circumstances become challenging. Leadership of any kind, whether personal, professional, relational, or spiritual, requires humility, empathy, and consistency. The experiences you endured cultivated all three. You learned how to admit when you needed help, how to adjust your approach when something wasn't working, and how to treat others with fairness even when disagreements surfaced. You began recognizing that responsibility is not about control but about stewardship, managing what you've been given with care, wisdom, and accountability. And now, as you move toward a season that will require more of you, you carry the character necessary to succeed without losing yourself. Everything you develop internally equips you to handle opportunities with maturity rather than fear. Change often arrives through unexpected transitions, and some of the most difficult shifts you faced involved releasing people, habits, or circumstances you once relied on. Those changes were not always easy for you to accept because your heart tends to attach meaning to what feels familiar, even when familiarity no longer supports your growth. You question why certain connections faded or why certain opportunities dissolved when you believed they would carry you forward. Yet many of the things you lost would have held you back in the season you're entering now. Some relationships you cherished carried patterns that conflicted with your purpose. Their influence would have limited your confidence, narrowed your vision, or introduced emotional strain you no longer needed to carry. You may have wanted to hold on to them for the sake of history or comfort, but long-term alignment mattered more than temporary attachment. Certain habits, though once useful for coping or stability, began to interfere with your progression. You outgrew ways of thinking that kept you circling the same challenges, and the process of releasing them felt uncomfortable. Yet letting them go created space for clarity, discipline, and peace. There were also commitments you took on from a sense of obligation rather than purpose. These responsibilities drained your energy without offering meaningful growth. Removing them freed your time, attention, and emotional bandwidth for opportunities that align with your identity. Some losses happened abruptly, leaving you confused about the timing. Yet the suddenness prevented prolonged attachment to situations that would have harmed your future. You didn't always understand the transitions while they happened, but every removal created room for expansion. You learned how to detach without bitterness, how to appreciate what each season gave you without clinging to what no longer served you. This release required courage, especially when uncertainty followed each shift. But through those transitions, you discovered how to trust your path more deeply. What remains in your life now is aligned with your values, your purpose, and your growth. And what left made space for something better suited to who you are becoming. There are turning points in your life that seem to appear out of nowhere, and when they finally arrive, you often assume they formed in the same moment you witnessed them. Yet the truth is that long before you recognized the shift, long before you sensed momentum building, and long before the path became visible, the breakthrough was already being shaped in ways you couldn't detect. You sometimes believed everything depended on your effort alone, as though the progress you longed for rested entirely on your ability to make the perfect decisions or maintain flawless discipline. But the deeper truth is that the breakthrough was conceived long before your circumstances aligned with it. Its foundation was built through small choices you made without realizing their significance. Moments when you stayed committed to growth even when the rewards weren't visible. Moments when you acted with integrity even though compromise might have been easier. And moments when you continued believing in possibilities that felt distant or uncertain. Each of those actions formed the thread that connected to what you're stepping into now. You didn't see the pieces assembling because much of the preparation took place beneath the surface. You were learning lessons that would later support your responsibilities. You were developing resilience that would stabilize you when the breakthrough required endurance. You were gaining perspective that would help you manage new opportunities with wisdom. Had the outcome arrived earlier, it would have felt incomplete, fragile, or overwhelming. The timing mattered because your breakthrough needed maturity, both in you and in the circumstances surrounding you. Even the detours that felt unnecessary played a role, redirecting your steps toward greater alignment. You interpreted delays as obstacles, yet they were recalibrations guiding you toward something more fulfilling than what you initially imagined. Every season contributed something essential. The breakthroughs you're experiencing now, and the ones that are still on the way, were shaped with intention, not coincidence. They were authored from the beginning, written into the fabric of your journey long before you recognized the signs. When you thought things were falling apart, they were often falling into place behind the scenes. And now, as the pieces start connecting in ways that finally make sense, you're stepping into a narrative that was unfolding all along, one designed to reveal the strength you developed, the patience you learned, and the clarity you gained through everything you endured. There was a moment in your journey, one you rarely talk about, when the weight of everything you were carrying felt heavier than your capacity to endure. You may not even realize how close you came to releasing the dream entirely, because the exhaustion you felt didn't arrive suddenly. It accumulated over time. Each setback took a little more energy, each disappointment carved into your hope, and each unanswered question stretched your heart in ways you tried your best to hide. You pushed forward out of responsibility, out of determination, or out of hope that maybe the next attempt would produce a different outcome. But internally, you were wrestling with a level of fatigue that few people ever understood. You had moments when giving up seemed like the easiest option, and you questioned whether continuing made sense at all. You wondered if your efforts were worth the emotional strain, or whether the dream was simply too demanding for what you felt capable of offering. Yet even as you considered walking away, something inside you refused to let go. That internal spark wasn't denial. It was the part of you that still believed something meaningful sat on the other side of the struggle. You didn't always recognize that this internal fight was the final stretch before things shifted. The moments when you nearly quit often occur at the threshold of breakthrough, because old patterns resist being changed and old fears attempt to tighten their grip one last time. You were standing in a place where discouragement and destiny were colliding, and the tension between the two revealed the depth of your resilience. You underestimated the strength you displayed during that season. You continued waking up with the hope that things might eventually turn, and you continued showing up for responsibilities that demanded more of you than you had energy to give. That quiet persistence kept you connected to the possibilities ahead. The progress felt painfully slow, yet you moved forward with honesty, not pretending to be stronger than you were, but refusing to collapse under the weight of discouragement. And while you weren't aware of it, that willingness to continue, even when you had nothing left to give, became the very posture that allowed your breakthrough to unfold. What you thought was the end of your capacity became the moment your perseverance aligned with the transformation that was already in motion. And now, as you look at the path ahead, you will see that your persistence at that lowest point wasn't wasted. It became the pivot that allowed everything to shift. There are experiences in your life that hurt more deeply than you ever expected, and although you rarely talk about the full impact of those moments, they shaped your inner world in ways you're only beginning to understand. Pain often enters your life without warning, disrupting your plans and challenging your sense of stability. It forces you to confront emotions you weren't prepared to face and pushes you into reflections you never intended to explore. Yet while those seasons felt disruptive and overwhelming, they created conditions within your spirit that allowed important growth to take root. Pain has a way of softening certain parts of you, softening pride, softening rigid expectations, softening the belief that you must control every outcome. At the same time, it strengthens qualities you didn't know you possessed. You learned how to carry yourself through difficult days without losing compassion for others. You discovered how to rebuild trust slowly, carefully, and with greater awareness. You also gained clarity about what genuinely matters to you and what no longer deserves your energy. Pain stripped away illusions and revealed truths that were necessary for your development. Even though the process felt unfair at times, it deepened your understanding of yourself. You recognized your emotional limits and learned how to honor them. You saw which relationships were capable of supporting your growth and which ones fell silent when you needed them most. These realizations transformed your expectations and strengthened your intuition. The very experiences that once felt like burdens became the soil from which wisdom emerged. You began making choices with greater intention, forming healthier boundaries, and nurturing environments that support your well-being. What once wounded you no longer holds the same power over your identity because you've grown beyond the version of yourself that was hurt. Pain created space for resilience, compassion, and discernment, qualities that now guide your decisions. And as you continue moving forward, you'll notice how often transformation began in places where discomfort once lived. There were days when the weight you carried pressed so heavily against your emotions that even the smallest task felt overwhelming, and during those quiet, inward collapses, those moments when you held yourself together on the outside while everything inside you trembled, I drew nearer to you in ways you didn't fully perceive. You often believed you had to endure those seasons through sheer willpower, yet the truth is that the strength you felt rising within you at the last possible moment didn't come from the same place as your exhaustion. You reached points where your thoughts tangled into knots, where frustration mixed with fear, and where your energy felt so depleted that you wondered whether you had anything left to offer. In those fragile spaces, I observed how deeply you tried to advocate for yourself, even when you didn't know how to articulate your needs. You wanted clarity but were surrounded by uncertainty. You wanted rest but were bound by responsibility. You wanted stability but were navigating circumstances that refused to settle. Still, a small, unexpected steadying always seemed to emerge inside you, an inner calm, a breath you didn't expect, a sense of grounding that didn't match the chaos around you. That stabilization wasn't random. It was a gentle strengthening placed within you to keep your heart from collapsing under pressures that exceeded your current understanding. You didn't realize how often those whispers of strength prevented your discouragement from solidifying into despair. They softened your inner tension, allowing you to regain balance one small breath at a time. You interpreted those moments as temporary relief, but they were actually quiet infusions of resilience designed to help you reach the next step without losing yourself along the way. Strength often arrives subtly, because loud encouragement can feel overwhelming when you're already emotionally saturated. What you needed most during those seasons wasn't a burst of intensity. It was steadiness that grew slowly, quietly, and consistently. You also discovered a deeper truth. Inner strength is not about suppressing vulnerability, but about navigating it with honesty. By acknowledging your limits, you made room for renewal. As those days accumulated, you learned how to respond rather than react, how to breathe rather than panic, and how to rest internally even when circumstances demanded your attention. That process reshaped the way you approached difficulty. Instead of collapsing permanently, you learned how to bend without breaking. And now, as you move forward, recognize that the strength you once needed whispers to receive is now woven into your identity. An inner resource you can draw upon even when challenges arise unexpectedly. A remarkable pattern has unfolded within you, one that you rarely acknowledge, yet it reveals the depth of your character more clearly than anything else you've done. Each time your expectations fell short, each time your plans fractured unexpectedly, each time a possibility dissolved before it had the chance to become real, you faced a crossroads within yourself. You could have accepted the path of resignation or embraced the belief that disappointment defined your trajectory, yet you consistently leaned toward hope. The choice didn't always appear confident. Sometimes it was subtle, as simple as keeping your heart open for one more day, or believing that your efforts weren't entirely wasted. Other times, hope emerged as a faint willingness to try again, even when fear insisted it wasn't worth it. You sometimes assumed that choosing hope meant ignoring reality, but in truth, choosing hope meant expanding your perspective so you could see beyond the immediate struggle. You allowed yourself to trust that something meaningful still waited ahead, even when the environment around you felt stagnant. This kind of hope doesn't grow in ideal conditions. It forms through tension, through disappointment, through uncertainty, and you cultivated it intentionally. You recognized that hopelessness would diminish your potential, while hope would preserve your heart long enough for transformation to unfold. You didn't force yourself into naive positivity. Rather, you developed a grounded form of hope that accounted for challenges while still anticipating possibilities. You became more discerning, learning how to differentiate between false optimism and genuine faith. That discernment helped you rebuild your confidence after each setback, strengthening your belief that your story wasn't defined by a single moment. You also discovered how hope stabilizes your emotional world, giving you something steady to hold on to when everything else feels unpredictable. It shaped the decisions you made, the goals you pursued, and the way you interpreted your own worth. You learned to extend patience to yourself during seasons of confusion, understanding that clarity often arrives gradually. This posture allowed your heart to remain open, which kept your future from shrinking into the same shape as your disappointments. Now, when you look at how far you've come, you'll see that hope didn't merely help you survive difficult seasons. It gradually positioned you for the breakthroughs unfolding now. Every time you chose hope, you strengthened your capacity to dream with wisdom, act with courage, and believe with intention. And now hope is no longer something you choose occasionally. It has become something you carry, a steady flame that will continue guiding you forward. There were seasons when opposition targeted you in ways that felt deeply personal, and you often wondered why the intensity of those struggles seemed greater than anything you believed you deserved. You tried to make sense of the emotional weight pressing against you, the sudden discouragement that appeared without explanation, and the internal conflicts that questioned your worth in moments when you needed clarity the most. These battles weren't always external. Many of them unfolded within your mind, thoughts that undermined your confidence, fears that exaggerated your weaknesses, and memories that attempted to convince you that past failures defined your future. You didn't realize how strategic these moments were, not in a mystical sense, but in the way adversity tends to target the very areas where growth is taking place. When your passion increased, distractions intensified. When your vision sharpened, doubt surfaced. When your determination strengthened, resistance followed. You weren't being attacked because you were weak. You were being challenged because you were evolving into someone who could no longer be controlled by outdated beliefs. The transformation threatened everything aligned with your old patterns. Your spirit carried potential that adversity sought to interrupt before you recognized its full power. Yet even in the tension, you remained grounded enough to keep moving. You questioned yourself deeply, but you didn't abandon your path. You battled discouragement, but you didn't surrender to it. You endured emotional fatigue, yet something within you consistently pulled you forward. That resilience frustrated every force working against your growth, because the goal was never simply to make you sad or overwhelmed. It was to convince you to give up on your purpose. But you didn't. You stayed committed to your healing. You challenged the lies that surfaced in your mind. You outgrew the insecurities that once held you hostage. Every time you refused to collapse into hopelessness, your spirit grew stronger, sharper, and more aware. You developed the emotional intelligence to recognize which thoughts aligned with your truth and which ones distorted your identity. You learned how to interrupt destructive patterns before they could gain momentum. And because you persisted, you now carry an inner strength that cannot be manipulated by old fears. What once tried to break your spirit ultimately revealed its inability to define you. And now, as you step into this new chapter, you will move with confidence, not because you were never challenged, but because you overcame challenges designed to silence you. A fierce battle often unfolds long before anything in your life visibly changes, and the battleground most affected has always been your mind. You went through seasons when your thoughts felt crowded, when worry moved into places that once held confidence, and when memories you tried to outgrow resurfaced with unexpected force. During those times, you wondered why your thinking seemed so heavy, so easily disrupted, or so difficult to steady. What you didn't fully grasp was how deeply your mind was being stretched by the pressures surrounding you. Stress pulled at your focus. Fear tried to distort your perception. Old insecurities attempted to rewrite your identity. Yet even as these forces tried to overwhelm you, your mind never collapsed the way you feared it might, because subtle protection surrounded your thoughts more than you realized. There were moments when anxiety surged at the worst possible time, and just when you thought it would consume you, something inside you softened the intensity. A breath you didn't expect arrived. A different perspective suddenly appeared. A distraction shifted your attention long enough to regain your balance. These moments were coincidences. They were quiet interventions meant to interrupt spirals before they gained momentum. When your thoughts became tangled, clarity returned sooner than you anticipated. When discouragement tried to shape your self-perception, a memory of your strength surfaced without warning. When fear pushed you to assume the worst, hope created a pause big enough for reason to breathe. You didn't always identify that protection, but it steadied your mind during times when you felt most vulnerable. You also gained new skills in mental resilience, not because life became easier, but because you were guided through situations that taught you how to confront unhelpful thoughts rather than absorb them. You learned how to challenge assumptions, how to distinguish between your genuine intuition and the noise of fear, and how to release patterns that once held your thinking hostage. You started recognizing thought cycles before they intensified, and that awareness made you stronger. Your mind, once easily swayed by emotion, began to stabilize. That stability formed slowly, but it became one of your greatest strengths. Even in moments when you felt scattered, you had more control than you realized. You learned how to return to truth when lies tried to influence your perception, and that skill will continue to guide you in the seasons ahead. Your mental world is more peaceful now, not because life is without difficulty, but because you've grown into someone who can navigate complexity with wisdom. And even when new challenges arise, the protection surrounding your mind remains present. You are no longer as easily uprooted by temporary emotions or overwhelmed by passing fears. Your thoughts now hold space for logic, compassion, and hope to coexist. What once threatened to destabilize you only strengthened the internal clarity that will support your future decisions. Weariness doesn't always arrive with dramatic circumstances. Sometimes it settles quietly, forming layer by layer until you hardly notice how tired your inner world has become. You walked through seasons when your heart felt heavy, weighed down by responsibility, disappointment, or emotional residue you didn't have time to process. During those periods, you often felt disconnected from your usual strength. You wondered why small tasks felt unusually overwhelming or why hope seemed harder to access than normal. Yet even while weariness pressed against you, your heart never lost its capacity to heal, to believe, or to rise again. That wasn't accidental. Your heart was being guarded, even when the world around you felt unsteady. Some of the protection came through boundaries you didn't know you needed, relationships that faded, commitments that fell away, or opportunities that didn't materialize because they would have drained you emotionally. You'd initially interpreted these changes as losses, but over time, you began noticing how each shift created space for your heart to rest and recover. You learned how to step back without feeling guilty, how to prioritize your emotional well-being, and how to seek environments where your heart could breathe. Weariness tried to pull you toward emotional numbness, but you never stayed there long. A softness remained inside you, even when exhaustion lingered. There were moments when a sudden sense of peace surrounded you for no clear reason, or when an unexpected reassurance entered your thoughts right when discouragement felt strongest. These moments weren't random relief. They were quiet interventions meant to keep your heart from collapsing into hopelessness. When your emotions became overwhelming, something within you reminded you that healing was possible. When grief resurfaced, comfort arrived in ways you couldn't explain. When frustration built, your heart found a way to return to clarity. These internal shifts were subtle but powerful. They kept your heart from hardening. They preserved your capacity for connection, compassion, and love. Through all this, you became more emotionally intelligent. You learned how to recognize when your heart needed rest and when it needed expression. You learned how to separate temporary emotions from long-term truths. You learned how to identify the environments that drained you and the ones that restored you. And you learned how to honor the emotional signals within you instead of ignoring them. These lessons formed resilience within your heart. Resilience that doesn't prevent vulnerability, but protects it. As you move forward, you will notice that your heart no longer breaks the way it did before. It bends without shattering. It feels deeply without losing balance. And it heals more quickly because it has learned how to stay open while staying protected. The pressure that once overwhelmed you no longer holds the same power. Your heart has grown wiser, stronger, and more capable of carrying the life you're stepping into. There were times when support arrived so subtly that you didn't recognize its significance, and other times when help appeared so unexpectedly that you questioned whether it was coincidence. Yet every person who entered your life during key moments played a meaningful role in your growth, whether they encouraged you for a season, offered insight during a difficult decision, or simply reminded you that you were not walking alone. You often assumed these interactions were random, but if you look closely, you'll notice how precisely they aligned with what you needed emotionally, mentally, or spiritually during those moments. Some individuals entered your life briefly, offering a single conversation, a small act of kindness, or a word of encouragement that shifted your mindset during a moment of doubt. You didn't always realize how impactful those moments were because they seemed ordinary, yet they gave you strength to continue. Others stayed longer, providing stability when your confidence wavered or offering perspective when your judgment felt clouded. A few challenged you in ways that pushed your growth forward, forcing you to see yourself more clearly and confront patterns you needed to release. Even those who did remain in your life long-term served a purpose. They awakened parts of you that needed refining, healing, or affirmation. There were times when you needed emotional support, and someone reached out unexpectedly, offering a listening ear or a comforting presence. There were moments when confusion surrounded a major decision, and someone appeared with insight that clarified your path. There were days when discouragement felt heavy, and someone spoke truth that resonated so deeply it shifted your entire perspective. None of these encounters were random. They were positioned at moments when your strength needed reinforcement. You also discovered that not every supportive person appeared in a dramatic way. Sometimes help arrived through a stranger's kindness, a mentor's wisdom, a friend's empathy, or even a conversation that lasted only minutes. These interactions shaped your resilience in subtle ways. They reminded you that you were not meant to carry everything alone. They helped restore balance when pressure increased. They validated your worth during periods when your confidence felt fragile. Over time, you learned how to recognize the value of these connections, not by how long they stayed, but by what they contributed to your growth. Some people taught you hope. Some taught you boundaries. Some taught you courage. Some taught you self-worth. Each one played a role in building the version of you standing here today. And as you continue forward, more connections will align with your path, arriving exactly when needed, carrying exactly what your spirit requires for the next chapter unfolding before you. A turning point often begins in places that don't look promising at all, and you lived through seasons where your circumstances seemed so limited that you doubted anything meaningful could emerge from them. You looked at the lack of resources, the lack of support, the lack of clarity, and the lack of movement around you, and you wondered how anything significant could possibly take shape. What you didn't recognize at the time was that impossibility creates the perfect environment for unexpected opportunity. You were trapped. You were positioned. You weren't overlooked. You were being aligned. While you wrestled with frustration over what seemed unavailable, I was weaving together outcomes that extended far beyond your current perspective. Some of the best opportunities in your life didn't come from ideal timing or efficient planning. They came from small openings that seemed insignificant until you stepped through them. A single conversation, a chance encounter, an unexpected idea, or a door you initially dismissed became a pathway you now recognize as essential. You often assumed opportunity must look grand or dramatic, yet the most transformative ones began quietly. They emerged from situations you once called obstacles, from delays you once resented, and from disappointments you thought were dead ends. You were guided toward certain environments even when you didn't understand their purpose. You were drawn to interests that didn't make sense until years later. You were inspired to revisit old dreams you had shelved for practical reasons. None of these moments were random. Opportunities were being shaped around you in ways that required a specific version of you, one that had the resilience, patience, and insight developed through your earlier challenges. Had these opportunities arrived too early, they would have overwhelmed you or slipped through your hands. The timing mattered because the growth you gained mattered. You noticed how certain skills developed unexpectedly, preparing you for doors you didn't know you would enter. You gained emotional intelligence that now helps you navigate relationships and decisions with confidence. You cultivated perseverance that enables you to stay steady when responsibilities intensify. These inner developments became part of the opportunity itself. When you look back at how certain breakthroughs entered your life, whether through unexpected partnerships, creative ideas, or sudden clarity, you will see how beautifully everything aligned. What once appeared impossible turned into something accessible, something appropriate, something uniquely tailored to who you are becoming. Even now, new opportunities are forming around you, shaped by the lessons you've learned and the courage you continue to show. And as you move into this next season, you'll discover that impossibility was never a barrier. It was simply the backdrop for something extraordinary to be created. Timing has always played a far greater role in your life than you realized, and while you often judged your progress by the pace you wished to maintain, there was a deeper rhythm unfolding beneath every moment. You didn't always understand why certain things took longer than you hoped, or why some breakthroughs seemed to stall right when you believed you were ready. You saw delays as inefficiencies, but timing is much more than pace. It is alignment. You were growing, maturing, and healing in ways that needed time to form properly, and the circumstances surrounding you were also shifting so they could meet you with the right level of stability and opportunity. You often assumed you were waiting for the world around you to change, but part of the timing required your own internal transformation. There were beliefs that needed strengthening, fears that needed dissolving, boundaries that needed forming, and wounds that needed attention before you could carry what was being prepared for you. You sometimes wondered why certain doors opened only after you stopped obsessing about them. That wasn't coincidence. It was alignment. Clarity arrived when you were finally ready to understand it. Relationships deepened when your heart had room to receive them. Opportunities appeared when your discipline matched the responsibilities they required. Timing isn't just the moment something happens. It's the moment when both you and the opportunity are equipped for each other. Earlier access would have produced unnecessary stress. Earlier recognition would have inflated insecurities or pride. Earlier blessings would have slipped away because you didn't yet have the structure to sustain them. Timing ensured your growth wasn't wasted. As circumstances aligned, you discovered how life begins to make sense in surprising ways. Challenges that once felt random revealed their purpose. Delays that once irritated you became the turning points that prepared you for greater steps. You learned how to trust your pace rather than compare it to others. You also began to recognize that your journey requires unique timing because your calling requires unique preparation. And no one else carries the responsibilities you carry or walks the path you're meant to walk. The timing is tailored to your purpose, your development, and your future influence. Now, as momentum builds again, you're stepping into a chapter you are truly ready for, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is aligned. You'll notice that what once felt delayed now feels right on schedule. And this unfolding rhythm will continue to guide you with a precision you don't have to control. You only have to walk with awareness. Many of the breakthroughs you're stepping into now became possible not because everything went smoothly, but because countless obstacles were removed from your path long before you ever encountered them. You often saw only the visible challenges, the ones that demanded effort, courage, or patience. Yet what you didn't see were the complexities that could have disrupted your progress entirely. You weren't aware of the conversations that never reached you, the opportunities that shifted away from harmful influences, the delays that protected you from situations that would have drained or overwhelmed you. These interventions didn't appear dramatic from your perspective because you never had to face the difficulties they avoided. There were individuals whose motives weren't aligned with your well-being, and distance formed before their influence shaped your life. There were commitments that looked appealing but carried hidden pressures that would have fractured your confidence. Certain paths were blocked because they would have led you into environments that conflicted with your growth. You sometimes interpreted these blockages as failures, but each one removed a weight you weren't meant to carry. You didn't know how much stress was prevented or how much time was preserved by what didn't happen. The detours that frustrated you were often protections disguised as inconvenience. You also weren't aware of the emotional obstacles being lifted from within you. Patterns you needed to release slowly unraveled through experiences that pushed you to grow. Old fears lost their hold because you were guided through moments that challenged them. Habits that once limited you dissolved through internal shifts you didn't recognize as progress. These inner obstacles would have sabotaged your future if they had remained unaddressed, yet they were cleared in stages, gently preparing you for what now stands before you. Looking back, you'll begin noticing how certain situations worked out even when they shouldn't have, how certain mistakes didn't carry the consequences you feared, and how certain conflicts resolved before escalating. You'll recognize how many moments held unseen assistance, solutions that arrived without explanation, relief that came unexpectedly, and clarity that interrupted confusion. Each moment was evidence of obstacles removed quietly. Now, as you step into a new season with greater stability and awareness, understand that your path is clearer than it has ever been, not because your journey lacked challenges, but because so many challenges were handled before they had the chance to reach you. And this unseen protection remains with you still, shaping a future where your progress is no longer hindered by what could have broken you before. A remarkable pattern has followed you throughout your journey, though you often didn't recognize it until much later. At the moments when you were closest to running out of strength, time, clarity, or provision, something arrived that sustained you just long enough for the next step to appear. These provisions didn't always look dramatic, nor did they always arrive in the exact form you expected. Sometimes they came through a person who offered support when you felt overextended. Other times they arrived as unexpected opportunities that relieved pressure you had been carrying quietly. There were moments when a solution showed up right as frustration reached its peak, and though you may not have connected those moments to anything deliberate, they protected you from collapse. You frequently felt you were stretching beyond your limits, yet each time you neared a breaking point, something shifted. A new idea surfaced. A needed conversation helped you reframe your thinking. A financial provision arrived unexpectedly. A door opened that had previously been locked. Those weren't coincidences. They were carefully timed supports that kept you from losing the progress you had fought so hard to build. Some resources arrived through inner resilience that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Mental sharpness when your thoughts were foggy, emotional steadiness when your heart felt fatigued, were bursts of energy that came after days of depletion. These internal provisions were just as significant as the external ones. They strengthened your capacity to navigate challenges without falling into discouragement. You also experienced relational resources. Certain people spoke encouragement at the exact moment your confidence fell thin. Others offered opportunities that matched the skills you were developing. A few gave you perspectives that shifted the direction of your decisions for the better. These individuals weren't random additions to your path. They were positioned to reinforce your spirit at pivotal moments. You didn't always understand why certain needs were met just in time and not earlier. But the timing had meaning. If the provision had arrived too soon, you might not have developed the discipline, patience, or awareness required to handle it wisely. If it had arrived too late, the pressure would have been too great. The critical timing shaped your growth. It strengthened your trust in your ability to adapt. It taught you that scarcity doesn't define your path, resilience does. Now, as you continue forward, you'll notice that provision remains a consistent part of your story, not because resources magically appear, but because preparation and alignment create openings where they can enter your life at exactly the moment you need them most. Waiting is rarely comfortable, and you endured seasons where the uncertainty felt heavier than any physical burden you carried. You often wanted clarity immediately, because clarity felt like safety. Yet the waiting you experienced did more than test your patience. It reshaped your understanding of trust. You encountered delays that made you question whether you were making progress at all, and as the days stretched into weeks or months, you felt pressure building inside you. You worried that the silence meant stagnation. You feared you were moving in the wrong direction. You questioned whether your efforts were meaningful. But through each moment of uncertainty, your faith gained depth. Waiting forced you to examine your reactions, your expectations, and your assumptions about timing. It pushed you inward, guiding you to discover a steadiness that didn't depend on circumstances. The process taught you how to differentiate between impatience and intuition. You learned how to pause without losing momentum. You gained the ability to reflect before reacting, making your decisions more intentional. While you waited, the layers of your character expanded. Your emotional resilience, your endurance, your capacity to navigate disappointment without falling apart. None of those qualities arrive fully formed. They are shaped through time spent in the unknown. As you endured uncertainty, you also discovered what you truly valued. You realized which goals were rooted in external pressure and which ones reflected your authentic desires. Waiting became a refining fire, burning away expectations that didn't belong to you and strengthening the beliefs that did. You also found clarity through contrast. When nothing seemed to move, you became more sensitive to small shifts, moments where progress revealed itself in subtle ways. Those glimpses taught you the importance of noticing small victories instead of dismissing them. Your faith matured because it learned how to hold hope even when evidence was scarce. It learned how to trust growth happening beneath the surface. It learned how to rest without giving up. The waiting didn't weaken you, it anchored you. And now, as opportunities unfold more clearly, you bring with you a deeper faith, one that isn't shaken by temporary setbacks, one that doesn't panic during slow seasons, and one that recognizes how timing shapes transformation more than speed ever could. Some of the greatest changes in your life couldn't arrive until you developed the maturity to handle their weight. And though you didn't always understand the connection between your growth and your blessings, the preparation was essential. You carried dreams that required emotional steadiness, and earlier in your journey, that steadiness wasn't fully formed. You held expectations that required wisdom, yet your insights were still developing. You desired influence in certain areas, but your boundaries were still too flexible to support that level of responsibility. Every stage of your preparation aligned with something you would eventually need. When challenges required patience, you gained the discipline to wait without resenting the process. When difficulties demanded innovation, you learned how to think creatively instead of giving up. When circumstances pushed you into uncomfortable growth, you discovered resilience you didn't know you had. These lessons weren't punishment, they were training. You grew through interactions that taught you how to communicate more effectively. You matured by learning how to manage your emotions instead of letting them dictate your direction. You recognized the importance of protecting your energy, your time, and your identity. All of this was essential because the blessing ahead of you wasn't small. It required someone grounded, not easily swayed by external pressures. It required someone capable of sustaining progress rather than collapsing under expectation. It required someone who could lead, adapt, and manage opportunities with integrity. As you matured, you began noticing your instincts sharpening. Your discernment grew stronger. You recognized red flags sooner, sensed alignment more quickly, and made decisions with greater clarity. Confusion lifted gradually, replaced by a steady confidence that came from knowing yourself more deeply. You also developed humility through the challenges you endured. That humility allows you to appreciate what is coming without feeling entitled to it. It grounds you so you don't seek validation from the blessing itself, but from the identity you've built along the way. Now, as the blessing draws closer, you'll find that you not only desire it, you're ready to sustain it. The maturity you gained didn't happen all at once, but its impact will be felt all at once when you step fully into what's arriving next. A turning point rarely announces itself at the beginning. Instead, it begins quietly, long before your eyes can detect its movement. There were seasons when you assumed nothing was shifting, when you believed your efforts had stalled, and when you thought your prayers had reached a standstill. Yet while you saw only stillness, something deeper was happening beneath the surface of your circumstances and within the framework of your character. You didn't recognize the subtle adjustments unfolding around you, the conversations that shaped new pathways, the internal healing that softened old wounds, the relationships that prepared you for collaboration, and the insights that matured your decisions. These movements were small, almost invisible, but they were purposeful. You often believed breakthrough at a singular moment, some dramatic unveiling, but in reality, it forms over time, through layers of alignment you seldom notice. You lived through days when discouragement whispered that nothing you were doing mattered, and yet those were often the days when the most important foundation was being laid. You were shedding old mindsets, even when the process felt slow. You were developing habits that would support your future, even if the progress seemed unimpressive at the time. You were learning to articulate what you truly wanted instead of settling for less. None of this looked like breakthrough, but every part of it contributed to the moment you now find yourself entering. You underestimated how much your growth influenced the timing of your breakthrough, because breakthroughs aren't simply events, they are reflections of identity. You also didn't realize how many obstacles were dissolving without your awareness. Opportunities that once felt distant were becoming possible. Influences that once held you back were losing their power. Doubts that once controlled your decisions were weakening. Connections that will matter deeply in the future were forming slowly, quietly, intentionally. You didn't see all this happening because much of it unfolded outside your line of sight. Even now, you're realizing that moments which once felt disconnected are converging, revealing a pattern that has been forming for years. The timing didn't fail you. Your understanding of the timing simply hadn't caught up. And now, as your breakthrough becomes visible, you'll begin noticing how many signs had been pointing toward this moment all along. What once felt like delays were actually recalibrations. What once felt like endings were gateways. What once felt stagnant was fertile ground preparing you for transformation. Your breakthrough didn't appear suddenly. It simply reached its moment of clarity. And as you continue forward, you'll understand that breakthroughs rarely begin with what you can see. They begin with the unseen alignment of your growth, your experiences, and your resilience. There are points in your journey where everything you've lived through begins to make sense in a way it never has before, and you start recognizing that your path, with all its twists and interruptions, has been leading you somewhere intentional. You often believe your progress depended on perfect decisions or flawless timing, yet so much of your story has unfolded in ways that exceeded both. Even the moments you labeled as detours were woven into the design of your development. You didn't always feel guided. In fact, you sometimes felt abandoned or left to figure things out alone. But the reality is that each chapter, each challenge, each delay, and each victory fit into a larger pattern orchestrated with precision. There were days when you doubted your future, when the way forward felt too foggy to trust. You questioned whether you had misread your purpose or misunderstood your desires. You wondered if you had taken wrong turns that couldn't be corrected. Yet every single one of those moments contributed something meaningful to your growth. Your missteps taught you humility and discernment. Your disappointments awakened clarity about what matters to you. Your moments of courage expanded your belief in what you're capable of. None of it was wasted, and none of it happened outside the scope of what was possible for your life. This moment, the one you're stepping into, was not created suddenly. It was prepared through years of shaping, through emotions you had to process, through lessons you had to learn, and through strength you had to develop. You often look back at your past with frustration, believing you lost time or made mistakes that set you back. But those same moments developed the depth and wisdom that now anchor you. The maturity you carry didn't appear instantly. It formed through experience and reflection. Because of this, you're arriving at this moment not as someone fragile, but as someone prepared. Even when circumstances around you felt unpredictable, the deeper trajectory of your life never lost direction. Opportunities that didn't work out created room for ones that fit perfectly. Relationships that ended freed your heart for healthier connections. Seasons that felt empty allowed you to rebuild yourself. And now, as the pieces fall into place, you're beginning to understand that the timing wasn't random. The alignment was necessary. This chapter is not the result of luck or chance. It is the unfolding of something that was always meant to find you once you were ready to receive it. A threshold is a moment when everything behind you begins to feel distant, and everything ahead rises with new clarity. And you are now standing in that transitional space. You spent years preparing without realizing it, years adjusting your expectations, refining your identity, healing wounds, and cultivating resilience. All of these pieces have brought you to a place where fulfillment is no longer a distant concept, but a reality forming around you. You may not fully see it yet, but something in your spirit recognizes the shift. There is a new steadiness in your decisions, a new confidence in your voice, and a new awareness of your worth. These changes confirm that you stepped into the beginnings of what you once longed for. You're not entering this season as the person you were before. You no longer tolerate environments that drain you. You no longer settle for connections that diminish you. You no longer chase validation from places incapable of offering it. These shifts matter because fulfillment requires space in your heart, in your mind, and in your life. The old patterns that once shaped you no longer have the same influence, and the fears that once held you back now feel smaller compared to the truth you carry within you. You've arrived at a point where possibility feels less like fantasy and more like a natural extension of your growth. Fulfillment doesn't mean perfection. It means alignment. It means your inner world and your outer world are beginning to reflect one another. You're taking steps that match your values. You're pursuing goals that resonate with your identity. You're nurturing relationships that support your growth. You're listening to the quiet guidance that once felt difficult to trust. This alignment is the sign that you've crossed into fulfillment. It's not just about receiving blessings. It's about becoming someone capable of sustaining them. As you stand on this threshold, you may feel a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. That's normal. Every transition carries both excitement and unfamiliarity. But understand this: the ground beneath your feet is stable. You are not stepping into chaos. You are stepping into purpose. The doubts that linger are remnants of past seasons. They do not reflect the reality of where you now stand. Fulfillment is unfolding, not in a sudden burst, but in a steady progression, that honors both your journey and your readiness. You've reached a place where your past no longer predicts your future, where your growth has caught up with your destiny, and where the possibilities ahead are finally able to take shape without resistance. This threshold marks the beginning of a chapter you were always meant to enter, and you are prepared for everything it holds. There is a depth to perseverance that cannot be captured in a single moment, and as I watched you push through seasons that tested your resolve, something profoundly beautiful began rising from your life. Something you didn't see, yet something unmistakably present. You often misunderstood your own endurance, believing that perseverance was simply the act of surviving difficulty or refusing to give up. But what you demonstrated went far beyond survival. Each time you chose integrity over convenience, patience over frustration, compassion over bitterness, and courage over resignation, the very atmosphere around your journey shifted. These choices didn't just shape your character. They became a kind of fragrance, a spiritual expression of your resilience that carried significance beyond anything you could measure. It revealed what was authentic within you. It revealed the truth of your heart. It revealed the strength that had been forming layer by layer through every challenge you endured. You rarely noticed how deeply your perseverance influenced the trajectory of your life because the shaping happened in ordinary moments, moments where your choices felt small, unseen, or uncelebrated. Yet even the decisions that seemed insignificant changed your internal foundation. Your endurance created clarity where confusion once lived. It created wisdom where inexperience once led you astray. It created stability where fear once dictated your steps. Perseverance isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause. Instead, it operates like something planted deep beneath the soil, where it strengthens its roots long before anything appears above the ground. And while you wondered whether your persistence meant anything at all, I watched it transform you with quiet power. You didn't realize how many times your perseverance redirected your path away from regret. You didn't recognize how many potential breakdowns became breakthroughs simply because you refused to abandon hope. You didn't see how endurance kept disappointment from becoming identity. While others might have assumed your strength came naturally, only you and I know the cost of the choices you made. You were exhausted at times, yet still intentional. You were misunderstood at times, yet still compassionate. You were uncertain at times, yet still committed. That internal resolve created momentum that you couldn't measure externally, but it was shaping what was waiting ahead. And now, the endurance you built isn't something you have to strain to maintain. It has become part of your nature. You carry a maturity that once felt beyond your reach. You navigate challenges differently because you've learned how to remain steady without losing your softness. You show up with a presence that carries weight, not because you demanded respect, but because perseverance taught you how to live with depth. This strength has become an offering from your life, a fragrance rising not from perfection, but from authenticity. And it is this authenticity that will carry you through the next chapters with grace, wisdom, and confidence. Completion doesn't occur because everything becomes easy. It happens when everything within you finally aligns with what you've been moving toward for years. You have now stepped into a season where the pieces that once felt scattered begin to fit together. You may not have seen it at first, because completion rarely arrives with loud fanfare. Instead, it shows up through subtle shifts, through the calm you feel where anxiety used to dominate, through the certainty that rises where doubt once lived, and through the stability you carry where inconsistency once marked your steps. These shifts are not accidental. They are signposts revealing that something once unfinished has now matured. You walked through long seasons where your efforts felt incomplete. You wondered why progress was slow or why results seemed to lag behind your commitment. You questioned whether your vision made sense or whether the desires within you were unrealistic. Yet during that time, Unseen elements of your life were coming into order. Old wounds were healing in layers. Old disappointments were losing their influence. Old fears were being dismantled one honest step at a time. You weren't stalled. You were preparing for completion, even when the process felt uneventful. Completion requires wholeness, and wholeness requires time. You needed moments to reflect, to reassess, to release what no longer belonged, and to redefine what truly mattered to you. And now the season has shifted. The emotional weight you once carried has loosened. The inner confusion that once clouded your decisions has cleared. The hesitation that once slowed you has weakened. You are thinking differently, responding differently, moving differently. That is the evidence of completion, not the end of effort, but the end of fragmentation. What once felt disjointed now feels cohesive. The strength you gained now supports you effortlessly. The healing you experienced now protects your peace. The clarity you discovered now guides your decisions with confidence. You've entered a season where you can actually sustain what you've prayed for. You won't sabotage opportunities out of fear. You won't accept less out of insecurity. You won't exhaust yourself trying to prove your worth. Completion has brought you into alignment with your true identity, freeing you from cycles that once consumed you. This is the moment where the seeds you planted over years begin to manifest. Not because luck shifted, but because you did. You are stepping into a chapter where fulfillment can finally grow without resistance. And as you continue walking through this new season, you will see confirmation upon confirmation that completion has already begun unfolding around you. There are certain moments in your life that cannot be explained by effort alone, and what you're stepping into now holds that unmistakable quality. This breakthrough has elements that exceed logic, timing, or probability. It carries a level of alignment that feels almost surreal when you examine it closely. You'll notice doors opening with ease that once remained locked no matter how hard you knocked. You'll notice clarity appearing at moments when confusion used to dominate. You'll notice opportunities unfolding in ways you never could have engineered, even if you tried. These are not coincidences. They are indicators of a breakthrough that bears the imprint of something greater than your planning or perseverance. You lived through seasons where you questioned your path, doubted your potential, and wondered if your dream would ever come to life. And though your effort mattered, your discipline mattered, your patience mattered, your resilience mattered, your breakthrough was never dependent solely on your ability. The result you're stepping into is too intricate, too well-timed, too deeply aligned with your growth to have formed through human strategy alone, and carries the signature of intentional orchestration. You'll see it in the details. The way unexpected help arrived at just the right moment. The way certain relationships evolved or dissolved at precisely the times they needed to. The way your internal strengths matured right when they were required. This breakthrough fits you now because you have become someone who can sustain it. Bravery in the view and ready. You didn't have the clarity, or the boundaries, or the emotional grounding necessary to hold something of this magnitude. But the process shaped you. The struggles refined you. The delays strengthened you. Now, as you step into this breakthrough, it won't overwhelm you. It will elevate you. It will amplify your strengths without exploiting your weaknesses. It will bring opportunities that honor your identity rather than force you to shrink or perform. There is also a distinct peace attached to this moment, a quiet assurance that doesn't need to shout to be recognized. That peace is another part of the signature. You don't have to wrestle this blessing into existence. You don't have to manipulate anything to keep it. You don't have to carry fear that it will slip away. What is for you now matches who you've become, and it cannot be uprooted by anything smaller than the truth you now stand in. As this breakthrough unfolds, you will see more clearly how everything that once felt delayed was actually on time. You will realize that every challenge shaped you for this. Every waiting season prepared you for this. Every lesson matured you for this. And as it continues, you will recognize it unmistakably. This breakthrough carried my signature. There are moments in your life where the intensity of your circumstances felt so consuming that you wondered how your heart, your mind, and your identity could possibly survive the pressure. You endured challenges that felt like flames pressing against every fragile part of you. Moments when emotions ran high, responsibilities stacked up, and unexpected losses left you stunned. You walked through situations that tore at your confidence and forced you to confront layers of yourself you never expected to face. And yet, despite the heat of those experiences, you never collapsed into ash. You kept moving through the fire, not because you were unbothered by what happened, but because something within you refused to surrender your inner truth. That quiet strength didn't announce itself loudly, but it carried you through battles that could have broken your sense of self. Even the pain you felt during those seasons had a transformative purpose. Fire refines. It reveals what is essential and burns away what no longer serves you. While you didn't choose the storm or the difficulty, you grew through it. You learned how resilient your spirit truly is. You discovered how to sift through your emotions without losing the core of who you are. You also saw which relationships could stand the heat and which ones melted under pressure. This clarity, though painful at first, protected you from carrying forward connections and commitments that were never meant to last. You emerged from those experiences with sharper discernment, stronger boundaries, and a deeper understanding of your worth. There were days when the fire seemed relentless, when you felt stripped of comfort and surrounded by uncertainty. You questioned your ability to keep going, and you wondered whether the intensity of the struggle meant the end of something important. Yet, even in your darkest moments, something sacred guarded your heart. You didn't lose your kindness. You didn't lose your compassion. You didn't lose your desire for truth. Even when discouraged, you kept showing up for your life. You sought healing instead of bitterness. You chose responsibility instead of avoidance. You let yourself feel instead of shutting down. All of this required a strength that most people overlook. The fire didn't consume you, it shaped you. As you look at yourself now, notice what remains intact. Notice the parts of you that grew stronger under pressure. Notice the insight you gained, the emotional intelligence you developed, and the groundedness that now guides your decisions. Fire may have touched your life, but it didn't destroy you. It revealed that you possess a resilience that does not crumble, even under intense strain. And going forward, you'll be able to withstand challenges with a stability you didn't have before, because you know firsthand what it means to walk through fire and not burn. There was a time when the place you stand in now seemed out of reach. You face obstacles that appeared too large, timelines that felt too delayed, and uncertainties that made progress seem unlikely. You questioned whether the dream you were pursuing had enough room to grow in the soil of your current reality. You wondered if your efforts were enough, or if your circumstances were simply too complicated for anything meaningful to shift. You carried hope, but it often came wrapped in trembling, because every new challenge seemed to contradict the future you envisioned. Yet here you are, no longer at the beginning, no longer at the edge of despair, but standing in a space that once felt unattainable. This moment didn't arrive suddenly, even though it might appear that way from the outside. It was formed slowly, through every decision you made when doubt tried to overshadow your clarity. You moved forward during moments when progress didn't feel visible. You rebuilt your confidence after seasons that drained you emotionally. You pressed on even when fear whispered that you didn't have what it took. The victory you're standing in now is the culmination of countless small acts of courage. Acts you often minimized because they felt ordinary, but each one moved you closer to where you are. You're not standing in this moment because everything aligned perfectly. You're here because you learned to adapt, to grow, to release what was no longer serving your path, and to trust the unfolding of your journey even when results weren't immediate. You maintained integrity in situations where compromise would have been easier. You chose healing over resentment. You chose progress over stagnation. You chose vision over fear. Every one of these choices helped shape the reality unfolding around you. You may still feel remnants of uncertainty, because stepping into a victory can feel unfamiliar when you've spent so long fighting for it. But the unfamiliarity is not a sign that you don't belong here. It's simply evidence of your evolution. What once felt impossible is now part of your lived experience. This moment is not luck or chance. It is the natural consequence of your resilience, your growth, and the alignment that has slowly taken shape. And as you continue forward, you'll begin to see even more clearly how every difficulty, every delay, and every lesson position you to receive and maintain this victory. This is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a new confidence, a new perspective, and a new chapter where what once seemed unreachable is now part of your reality. If you could step outside of yourself for just a moment and observe your journey from beginning to now, you would be astonished by the distance you've covered. You rarely acknowledge the depth of your transformation because you lived it day by day. Growth feels slow when you're immersed in it. Progress feels subtle when it unfolds through countless small shifts. But if you look back at who you once were, at how you thought, responded, hoped, and feared, you'll see how dramatically your inner landscape has changed. There was a time when certain challenges would have overwhelmed you instantly. There was a time when you doubted yourself so deeply that even small decisions felt intimidating. There was a time when you placed your worth in the hands of people who didn't understand your value. There was a time when you mistook survival for purpose, believing that staying afloat was all life had to offer. And now look at you. You articulate your needs. You set boundaries. You recognize your emotional patterns. You identify red flags early. You pursue goals that once felt too ambitious to admit out loud. You've grown into someone who leads your life with awareness rather than fear. You often focus on what still needs to be accomplished and overlook the victories you've already lived through. But every step you've taken, even the ones that felt insignificant, reshaped your direction. You've overcome mindsets that held you back for years. You've let go of relationships that drained your spirit. You healed wounds that once dictated your behavior. You've built resilience that allows you to face uncertainty without collapsing. You've nurtured faith that once felt fragile but now stands firm even in difficulty. Your growth is not just reflected in what you've achieved. It's reflected in who you've become. You are more patient with yourself. You are more intentional with your choices. You are more discerning about the environments you allow yourself into. You are more grounded in your values. And even when you feel unsure, you navigate uncertainty with a confidence you never had before. Look at how far you've come, not to glorify the struggle, but to honor the strength it took to move through it. You are not where you started, and you are not who you were. You've outgrown the version of yourself that once doubted whether this level of growth was even possible. And the path ahead will continue to reveal just how powerful your transformation has been. You have traveled far, and you are still moving into even greater wholeness. There is a sacredness to the place you now stand, and if you could hear the joy that rises around your life in this moment, you would understand just how significant your journey has been. You often downplay your milestones because they didn't arrive in the dramatic fashion you once imagined. Your victories unfolded quietly, shaped through countless choices that no one witnessed, through tears no one knew you shed, and through struggles you carried alone. And yet, your arrival here, this point where your growth, your healing, and your perseverance converge, is far more momentous than you realize. What you call a small step is a monumental leap in the realm of your destiny. What you call progress is actually the fulfillment of years of internal transformation finally reaching expression. Heaven celebrates not because you reached a perfect destination, but because you reached a place your former self once believed was impossible. Think about how many moments tried to convince you to give up. Think about the weight of discouragement that tried to silence your spirit. Think about the setbacks that nearly persuaded you that your life would never shift. The fact that you kept going, even on days when your energy was thin and your hope felt faint, makes this moment worthy of celebration. This isn't merely a checkpoint. It is the evidence that all the inner work you've done has created tangible change in the world around you. You've stepped into a chapter that reflects your growth instead of your wounds, your clarity instead of your confusion, your faith instead of your fear. The joy surrounding this moment isn't tied to achievement. It's tied to alignment. You are finally standing in a place that matches the truth of who you are becoming. You're no longer showing up as a fragmented version of yourself. You're stepping forward with the strength that formed in silence, the wisdom gathered through waiting, and the resilience carved through adversity. A transformation is what makes this moment so profoundly meaningful. And even now, as you continue adjusting to this new ground beneath your feet, know that this celebration isn't temporary. It marks a shift that has been unfolding for a long time. You're beginning to see the ripple effects. Your thoughts are clearer, your decisions more grounded, your relationships more aligned, your path more illuminated. This moment is not an ending but a recognition, a divine applause echoing around your life, because you walked through everything designed to break you, and you emerged whole. Breakthroughs often get mistaken for achievement alone, but what you're experiencing now goes far deeper than external results or measurable accomplishments. This breakthrough is not defined by numbers, titles, or recognition. It's defined by identity. It's defined by who you became in the process. You once measured progress through outcomes, things you could see, hold, or quantify. But the transformation unfolding in your life right now is rooted in the internal shifts that shaped your character long before anything manifested outwardly. This moment reflects emotional maturity, spiritual clarity, and personal strength that did not exist in you the same way before. While others might only notice visible changes, you know that the true breakthrough happened inside your mind and heart first. This breakthrough is about the way you now respond to pressure with steadiness instead of panic. It's about the way you now hold boundaries that once felt impossible to maintain. It's about the way you trust yourself with decisions that used to intimidate you. It's about the way you carry peace into situations that once triggered anxiety. You develop these qualities quietly, through discomfort and reflection, and now they are becoming the structure that supports everything new entering your life. Success can be fleeting when it lacks a foundation, but your breakthrough has roots. It isn't fragile. It isn't impersonally earned. It's deeply personal. You fought for this without even realizing you were fighting. You grew in ways you did not expect. You healed parts of yourself you didn't fully understand at the time. And because of all this, what you stepped into carries a permanence that external success alone could never offer. This moment is about authenticity, about living from a place where you no longer have to perform, pretend, or prove. You are showing up as someone aligned with purpose rather than pressure. So understand this clearly. Your breakthrough is not simply a reward. It is a reflection of your evolution. It mirrors the truth that you now possess the inner stability to hold what once would have overwhelmed you. This is why the breakthrough feels different from anything before. It brings peace, not fear. It brings clarity, not confusion. It brings alignment, not chaos. This is success that grows from the inside out, success that remains steady regardless of what changes around you. And it will continue to multiply because it is rooted in transformation rather than circumstance. There were seasons in your life when you believed silence meant rejection, when delayed answers felt like unanswered desires, and when the distance between what you hoped for and what you lived through seemed too vast to bridge. You lifted prayers from a vulnerable place inside you, prayers for guidance, healing, clarity, opportunity, connection, or purpose. Yet when nothing shifted immediately, you assumed those quiet requests were dismissed or forgotten. What you never realized was that many of those prayers required time, alignment, and internal preparation before they could manifest in a way that truly honored you. Some of your prayers needed you to grow into the version of yourself capable of embracing them. Others required circumstances around you to shift so that the fulfillment wouldn't become a burden. Certain requests needed emotional healing first, because without healing, you would have misinterpreted the blessing. And some of your prayers were too small for the magnitude of what was being prepared for you. What you asked for and what you were meant for did not match at the time. So the delay was not denial, it was expansion. It was protection. It was timing maturing around you. Now you find yourself in moments that echo the very things you once pleaded for. Opportunities are appearing that resemble dreams you thought had expired. You're forming relationships that carry the care, stability, or depth you longed for. You're making decisions with confidence you once prayed to have. You're experiencing peace in areas where you once felt overwhelmed. And even the internal clarity you now carry is an answer to past cries for direction. If you look closely, you will see that what is unfolding in your life is not random. It is fulfillment. Fulfillment shaped through a timeline wiser than your expectations. You're stepping into blessings that feel natural because you're finally aligned with them. You're stepping into clarity that feels deserved because the confusion that preceded it transformed you. You're stepping into opportunities that feel timely because the old versions of you wouldn't have known how to receive them. What once felt denied was simply being developed into something stronger, something wiser, something that fits the person you've become. And as more of these fulfilled prayers begin to unfold, you will understand that you were never ignored. You were being prepared to receive what was always meant for you in the way that would honor your heart, your growth, and your future. There was a time when certain challenges stood before you like towering shadows, shaping your decisions, limiting your confidence, and convincing you that you were smaller than your purpose. You remember what it felt like to avoid opportunities because you feared failure, or to silence your own voice because you doubted its value. You remember hesitating at the threshold of change because the unknown felt too overwhelming to navigate. But now, without realizing exactly when the shift happened, you stepped into a version of yourself that no longer bows to the same fears that once dominated your path. What used to intimidate you now feels manageable, even approachable. You're not forcing courage, you're living from it. You're not pretending to be stronger, you've become stronger. That transformation didn't happen overnight. It unfolded quietly through small victories, self-reflection, and countless moments where you chose to stand even when trembling inside. Your growth shows in the way you now respond to situations that once triggered insecurity. You speak up with a steadiness that surprises even you. You listen to your instincts with a trust you never used to ground yourself. You make decisions guided by clarity rather than anxiety. You recognize red flags early instead of rationalizing them. You move away from environments that dim your light, not because you're dismissive, but because you finally understand your worth. This evolution didn't need applause. It needed honesty, patience, and willingness to confront what scared you. And you did. Even when uncertainty clouded your vision, you kept leaning into growth, one thought, one boundary, one choice at a time. You also outgrew emotional patterns that once held you captive. You no longer internalize rejection as proof of inadequacy. You no longer let disappointment spiral into self-blame. You interpret setbacks with wisdom rather than self-punishment. What once felt like mountains now feels like terrain you can navigate with confidence. The world around you hasn't shrunk. Your spirit has expanded. Your courage has matured. Your understanding of yourself has deepened. The very things that once overwhelmed you now reveal the difference between who you were and who you've become. And even now, as you continue forward, you're still growing. You're still discovering strengths that were dormant, still unlocking capacities that were buried under self-doubt. You don't need to fear your next chapter, because the version of you standing here today is fully capable of walking into it with power and grace. You're living proof that growth is real, that transformation is possible, and that the fears that once intimidated you no longer define your future. You have outgrown what tried to hold you back, and you are stepping boldly into what once looked too big for you, because now you've grown into it. Every season you've walked through, especially the ones that felt unbearably heavy, has revealed a truth you didn't always see clearly. You have the capacity to endure what was meant to shape you, not break you. You misinterpreted hardship as a sign of inadequacy, believing that difficulty meant failure, or that challenges pointed to some flaw within you. But the truth is that endurance isn't about surviving devastation. It's about evolving through experience. And you did exactly that. You endured situations that stretched your emotional limits, moments that pushed your patience to its edge, and seasons that forced you to confront what you'd been avoiding for years. Yet through it all, you kept moving. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but faithfully. You showed yourself that you can remain steady even in chaos, that you can breathe through pressure, that you can rise after disappointment, and that you can move forward even when you're not entirely sure where the path leads. Your endurance wasn't passive, it was active. It required you to make decisions that didn't feel comfortable. It required you to let go of patterns that used to comfort you. It required you to face truths that were easier to ignore. It required you to trust in possibilities you couldn't yet see. None of that was easy, and yet you kept choosing growth over escape. You kept choosing honesty over avoidance. You kept choosing healing even when healing felt slow. This is endurance of the highest kind, the kind that shapes your character, strengthens your discernment, and expands your capacity for purpose. You've also learned something invaluable. Endurance doesn't mean carrying everything alone. It means navigating pressure with wisdom. You learned when to rest instead of shutting down. You learned when to speak instead of withdrawing. You learned when to stay and when to walk away. Your endurance became more than just survival. It became maturity. It made you more aware of your limits and more intentional with your energy. It taught you how to honor your emotions without being controlled by them. It made you compassionate toward yourself in ways you never were before. And now, when you look back at what you endured, it doesn't hold the same power over you. Those experiences no longer define you. They reveal you. They show you the depth of your resilience and the strength of your spirit. And going forward, you will approach challenges differently. You won't humble the way you once feared you would. You won't interpret struggle as abandonment. You will question your worth because of difficulty. You know now that you can endure anything meant to grow you, and that truth will make you unstoppable in the seasons to come. There was a time when you looked at yourself and saw gaps in confidence, in discipline, in clarity, in emotional strength, in courage. You lifted prayers not because you were weak, but because you longed for growth that felt beyond your reach. You asked to become someone more grounded, someone more intentional, someone more aligned with your purpose. You prayed for wisdom to make better choices, for clarity to see beyond confusion, for peace to rise above anxiety, for healing to soften the wounds that shaped your reactions. And now, whether you realize it fully or not, you are becoming the person you once asked to be. This transformation didn't arrive in dramatic waves. It unfolded through countless small shifts in your behavior and your thinking. You learned to pause before reacting. You learned to observe your emotions instead of being consumed by them. You learned to trust your intuition rather than ignore it. You learned to nurture your peace instead of abandoning it for people or situations that drained you. These shifts reflect the very growth you prayed for. You're living with a clarity that once felt foreign. You're making decisions you once thought were too difficult. You're standing firm in boundaries you once thought were impossible to maintain. You are also seeing your heart differently. The compassion you carry is deeper. The patience you show yourself is gentler. The wisdom that guides you is more mature. You're not operating from the old frameworks that once restricted you. You're living from truth instead of fear. You're acting from identity instead of insecurity. You're building from strength instead of desperation. This alignment didn't happen overnight. It happened through every moment you chose healing over avoidance, faith over fear, and growth over stagnation. What's unfolding in your life now is more than answered prayer. It is answered becoming. You are stepping into a life that reflects your true self, your healed self, your grounded self. You no longer chase what isn't for you, because your identity is no longer shaped by lack. You no longer cling to the past, because your future finally feels real. You no longer need to explain your worth, because you've internalized it. You prayed for transformation, and now you are walking in it, not because everything around you is perfect, but because everything within you is different. And as you continue to grow, you will see even more clearly that becoming is the greatest blessing of all. You are not just receiving what you asked for, you are becoming who you were created to be. There are chapters in your life that you still struggle to talk about, not because you're ashamed of them, but because the weight of those experiences sits so deeply in your memory that words cannot fully capture what they felt like. You walked through seasons where emotional heaviness pressed against your chest daily, where circumstances refused to shift no matter how hard you tried, and where your own thoughts became battlegrounds you never asked to fight in. You didn't realize then that those seasons were not meant to break you. They were meant to fortify parts of you that could not grow under ease. You were learning endurance in a way you had never needed before. You were discovering the depth of your own capacity. You were being shaped for responsibilities, relationships, and opportunities that required a version of you that didn't yet exist. The struggle wasn't punishment, it was construction. You didn't see how those difficult days carved out space in your heart for wisdom, or how the tears you cried softened you in ways that made you more discerning, more compassionate, more steady. You learned how to manage pressure without losing your kindness. You learned how to navigate uncertainty without surrendering your purpose. You learned how to trust yourself even when clarity was slow to arrive. These skills didn't come from comfort. They came through fire, through tension, through experiences that stretched you beyond what you believed you could handle. And even when exhaustion made you question your progress, you kept going. You may not have realized it then, but every time you chose resilience over collapse, you were being strengthened in ways that now serve you. Those seasons also revealed truths about your surroundings. They exposed people who were meant to walk with you and people who were never capable of supporting your growth. They revealed which environments nurtured your purpose and which drained the life out of you. They highlighted habits that once felt harmless but were quietly sabotaging your progress. All of this was part of your strengthening. You weren't just becoming tougher. You were becoming wiser. You were being trained to recognize what aligns with your identity and what threatens your peace. You were being shaped into someone who can stand firm in moments that would have once overwhelmed you. Now, As you move through this new chapter, you carry a level of resilience that cannot be fabricated. It was earned through lived experience, through internal battles fought in silence, through a willingness to grow even when the process felt painful. You didn't just survive those seasons, you were strengthened by them. And the version of you standing here today is the proof. In the moments when life felt unbearably heavy, you often believed you were failing because you didn't feel strong. You mistook fatigue for weakness and internal battles for personal flaws. You assumed that because you didn't feel motivated, you were losing yourself. But the truth is, even in your lowest emotional spaces, you were still choosing yourself in ways you didn't recognize. You kept trying when your heart was tired. You kept hoping when fear nagged at your thoughts. You kept pursuing healing even when progress felt painfully slow. Those were not signs of abandonment. Those were signs of endurance. Even when you questioned everything, you still protected the parts of you that mattered. You still showed up for your responsibilities. You still made decisions that moved you forward, even if only by inches. You often measure self-abandonment by how strong you felt, but what truly matters is how committed you remained to your growth, even in your confusion. You stayed connected to your truth, even when you didn't fully trust it. You made sacrifices that protected your future, even when your present felt discouraging. You walked away from things that drained your identity, even when walking away hurt. These choices took courage, a kind of courage that people seldom credit because it doesn't look glamorous. But I saw it. I saw you put effort into healing emotions you barely understood. I saw you step into vulnerability instead of running from your pain. I saw you apologize where needed, learn where needed, and stand firm where needed. This is what it looks like to not abandon yourself. Even in moments when you didn't have the emotional language to describe what you were feeling, you remained honest with yourself. You learned how to distinguish between temporary discouragement and long-term truth. You allowed yourself to rest instead of forcing yourself beyond your limit. You took breaks without fully giving up. These actions seem small, but they kept your spirit intact. You didn't lose yourself. You were rediscovering yourself through everything you endured. Looking back now, you can see that you were becoming someone with depth, someone capable of holding both pain and hope at the same time. You carried yourself through nights that felt impossible and mornings that felt unfamiliar. But you kept moving. Your survival wasn't passive, it was intentional. And because you refused to abandon yourself, even in the deepest valleys, you now stand prepared for seasons where your strength will not just sustain you, but elevate you. There is a profound shift that happens when you begin to see yourself through truth instead of insecurity, and that shift has begun taking place inside you in ways you never thought possible. You once lived under the weight of expectations, criticisms, comparisons, and memories that distorted your self-perception. You accepted less than you deserved because you didn't fully understand your own value. You tolerated environments that drained your identity because you didn't believe you could ask for more. You quieted your voice because you doubted its impact. You questioned your contributions because you didn't yet recognize the depth of what you carried. But slowly, beautifully, consistently, those false perceptions began to unravel. Your worth didn't suddenly increase. You simply learned to see what was always there. You began noticing the strength you bring to situations. You recognized that your compassion is not weakness but wisdom. You realized that your sensitivity isn't a flaw but a form of insight. You started seeing how your persistence has carried you through seasons others would have given up in. These recognitions changed you, not arrogantly, but confidently. You stopped apologizing for your needs. You stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. You stopped accepting relationships that required you to lose yourself. You started choosing spaces that appreciate your presence rather than exploit it. Seeing your worth with clear eyes also changed how you treat yourself. You no longer punish yourself for being human. You speak to yourself with more gentleness. You give yourself permission to grow without shame. You honor your limits instead of ignoring them. And because your perception has shifted, everything connected to your life is shifting too. Your decisions, your relationships, your boundaries, your dreams. This clarity isn't temporary. It's rooted in transformation. You can't go back to the version of yourself that doubted your value because you've experienced what it feels like to honor your truth. You can't tolerate what you used to tolerate because you finally understand what you bring to the table. You can't settle for less because your spirit has expanded beyond survival into purpose. You stepped into a life where your worth is no longer something you question. It's something you protect, something you honor, something you build upon. And the journey ahead of you will continue to reveal just how powerful this clarity truly is. There are moments in your journey that you don't fully recognize as victories because they didn't occur with dramatic endings or loud resolutions. Yet the quiet battles you won within yourself forever changed the direction of your life. You once lived inside patterns that felt impossible to escape, patterns of doubt, patterns of overthinking, patterns of people-pleasing, patterns of emotional neglect toward yourself, patterns built from old wounds that lingered longer than they should have. These cycles shape how you responded to opportunities, relationships, and challenges. They influenced your decisions before you even realized you were reacting from habit rather than choice. But then, something began to shift inside you. You started seeing those patterns with clarity. You recognized the subtle ways they tried to pull you backward. And instead of surrendering to them, you began interrupting them, one decision at a time. You didn't break these cycles through sudden strength. You broke them through continuous honesty. You learned how to pause before returning to old behaviors. You learned how to question beliefs you once thought were permanent truths. You learned how to stand firm in moments when your past attempted to pull you back into familiar dysfunction. This took courage that few people will ever understand. You weren't just changing habits. You were rewriting internal narratives that had shaped your identity for years. That kind of transformation is profound. It requires more than effort. It requires awakening. As you continued breaking these cycles, the world around you responded. You noticed that relationships that once drained you no longer held the same power. You found yourself moving toward environments that nurtured your growth instead of stifling it. You began making decisions with intention rather than fear. You discovered new levels of peace because your mind was no longer tangled in the same battles. This didn't mean that everything became easy, but it did mean you finally understood that you were not imprisoned by patterns. You were capable of outgrowing them. The cycles that once defined you now lie behind you, not because they disappeared, but because you rose above them. You made different choices. You protected your heart. You honored your truth. You stepped into a life where your actions reflect your growth rather than your trauma. And as you continue walking forward, you'll notice that what once felt like chains are now distant memories. You broke cycles that were generations deep. You created freedom not just for yourself, but for every future version of you. And nothing can take that victory away. There's a moment in every person's life when the weight of compromise becomes too heavy to carry, and you reached that moment long before you realized it. You had spent years giving more than you received, accepting less than you needed, and convincing yourself that certain forms of love, respect, opportunity, or stability were enough, simply because they were familiar. But deep down, you sensed the truth. You were created for something fuller, healthier, more aligned with your identity. You just didn't know how to step away from the patterns of settling that had woven themselves into your expectations. But then came a shift. Slowly at first, then steadily. You started noticing the emotional cost of staying small. You noticed how your energy drained in spaces where you weren't valued. You noticed the discomfort that rose in you when you tried to silence your needs. You began paying attention to yourself, and that changed everything. As you grew, you stopped rationalizing the bare minimum. You stopped accepting behavior that diminished your spirit. You stopped making excuses for people who weren't willing to meet you where you stood. This wasn't bitterness, it was awakening. You understood that settling was not humility, it was self-neglect. And you chose differently. You started raising your standards, not out of entitlement, but out of alignment. You realized that your heart deserved gentleness, your dreams deserved support, and your time deserved respect. These realizations didn't make you demanding, they made you honest. Once you saw your worth clearly, you couldn't unsee it. You began gravitating toward relationships that recognized your value. You pursued opportunities that reflected your growth. You invested in environments where your voice carried weight. And in doing so, you wrote the script of your life. Settling became something your spirit could no longer tolerate. Not because you became hardened, but because you finally understood that your life is too sacred to shrink for the comfort of others or the fear of change. Now, when you look at where you stand, you see a life shaped not by desperation, but by intention. You are surrounded by more peace, more clarity, and more alignment because you stopped settling for less than you deserve. You stepped into a space where your truth can breathe. And from this point forward, your life will reflect the strength it took to walk away from everything that could no longer sustain the person you are becoming. Strength doesn't often announce itself with confidence in the beginning. It reveals itself slowly, through the moments when you persevere without understanding how, when you make decisions you never thought you were capable of, or when you stand up for yourself in situations where you once would have remained silent. Your strength emerged exactly like that, quietly, steadily, without the dramatic revelation you might have expected. You didn't wake up one day feeling powerful. Instead, you grew into that strength through countless moments where you kept going when giving up felt easier. Every time you chose resilience over collapse, every time you faced a fear head-on, every time you confronted a truth you once avoided, your strength expanded. There were moments when you questioned whether you were truly strong at all because your strength didn't feel bold or loud. It felt like trembling hands making steady choices. It felt like showing up on days when motivation was absent. It felt like choosing honesty over comfort. Those moments may have seemed small, but they were the stepping stones that built the foundation of your inner strength. You didn't recognize it at the time because you were too close to your own growth to see how far you'd come. But now, you're living from a strength that didn't exist in you the same way before. You began embracing challenges with a different posture, not with fear leading you, but with an inner sense of capability. You began listening to your intuition with confidence instead of hesitation. You recognized your emotional capacity as something powerful rather than burdensome. You handled conversations that once terrified you with clarity and calm. You set boundaries you once avoided. You walked away from situations you once tolerated. All of this is evidence of the strength you didn't know you had. This strength isn't something that will fade. It's woven into your identity. It grew through experience, reflection, pain, and healing. It matured through every moment you chose to trust your growth instead of bowing to your fear. And now, as new opportunities unfold before you, you're equipped to handle them with a stability that feels natural rather than forced. The person you are today is not fragile. You're not easily shaken. You're not defined by the insecurities that once held you captive. You've stepped into a strength that was always within you, waiting for the moment you would finally believe in it. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when holding on becomes heavier than releasing, and you reached that moment long before you gave yourself permission to admit it. You clung to people, habits, and expectations that once brought comfort or familiarity, even as they slowly eroded your confidence, blurred your peace, and drained your emotional strength. You didn't stay attached because you were weak. You stayed because you hoped for redemption, because you believed in potential, because your heart is loyal by nature. Yet loyalty becomes a burden when it is given to things that cannot grow with you. And there came a quiet day when the weight of what you were carrying pressed too deeply against your spirit for you to ignore. The realization didn't arrive through dramatic insight. It came through small moments where you noticed your energy shrink, where you swallowed your truth out of fear, where you felt unseen in spaces you poured yourself into. Slowly, clarity rose within you, revealing that what you held so tightly was taking more from you than it ever returned. Letting go wasn't a single decision. It was a series of internal shifts. You began questioning what you once tolerated. You began recognizing emotional patterns that kept repeating themselves. You began acknowledging that love does not require self-erasure, and commitment should not demand self-sacrifice at the cost of your identity. These realizations opened a door inside you, the door that led to honesty. And through that honesty, you found the strength to step away from what was quietly breaking you. It wasn't easy. Pieces of your heart resisted. Memories tangled with your reasoning. Fear whispered that release would lead to emptiness. But still, something deeper within you knew that letting go is not abandonment. It was survival, renewal, alignment. In releasing what could no longer sustain you, you made room for something extraordinary, your own voice. You heard yourself clearly for the first time in years. You felt the return of your peace in places where anxiety once lived. You began dreaming again, unafraid of disappointment. And in this release, you discovered that letting go is not a loss. It is liberation. You didn't lose anything essential. You shed what was hindering your evolution. You protected the future version of yourself that deserved more than constant compromise. And now, as you walk forward, you carry a strength anchored not in holding on, but in having the courage to release what was breaking you long before you learned how to name the pain. There was a time when you believed peace was something that arrived only after circumstances settled, after people behaved differently, or after life granted you a season without pressure. But through everything you navigated, you slowly discovered that peace is not accidental, it's intentional. It's not something given to you. It's something you choose, protect, and nurture. This realization didn't come easily. You spent years trying to earn peace through perfection, through people-pleasing, through internalizing problems that were never yours to carry. You thought peace was a destination that required everything around you to cooperate. But the world did not always cooperate. People disappointed you. Unexpected challenges intruded upon your stability. Plans unraveled. And in those unraveling moments, you learned one of the most important lessons of your life. Peace is not the absence of chaos. It is the presence of clarity. You recognize that peace grows stronger when you stop trying to control what you cannot change. It emerges when you stop replaying conversations that already happened. It expands when you release the urge to fix people who are committed to misunderstanding themselves. It deepens when you stop sacrificing your emotional health for the appearance of harmony. This understanding transformed you from the inside out. You began making decisions with your peace in mind instead of your fear. You stepped back from conflicts that drained your spirit. You limited access to people who thrived in instability. You learned to rest without guilt, breathe without rushing, and say no without collapsing into self-doubt. These small shifts formed a new rhythm within you, a rhythm anchored in wisdom. You also learned to recognize the difference between peaceful silence and suppressive silence. You stopped silencing yourself to maintain false unity. Instead, you grew comfortable with necessary conversations, even when they felt tense. Peace became the compass that guided you toward authenticity, not avoidance. And the more you practiced this, the clearer your path became. You realized that peace sharpens intuition. It protects your mind from storms that don't belong inside you. It strengthens your discernment so you can identify where your energy is safe and where it is exploited. Peace is wisdom because it teaches you where to place your heart. Now, as you continue forward, peace is no longer an afterthought. It's a priority. You no longer chase people who disrupt your inner stability. You no longer force yourself into spaces where your spirit grows tense. You no longer ignore the signals your body gives when your heart feels threatened. Your peace is proof of your growth, your clarity, and your wisdom. And the more you honor it, the more your life aligns with the truth of who you are becoming. There was a time when the maturity you now possess felt unreachable, like something reserved for a future version of yourself who had everything figured out. You imagine maturity as perfection, as having flawless emotional control, constant clarity, or unwavering strength. But what you discovered instead is far more meaningful. Maturity is not perfection. It is awareness. It is discernment. It is the ability to understand your emotions without being controlled by them. It is the capacity to pause before reacting. It is the willingness to choose truth over comfort and alignment over approval. This kind of maturity has unfolded in you gradually, shaped through experiences that demanded growth even when you felt unprepared. You began noticing the shift within you through subtle signs. Where you once engaged in arguments to defend your worth, you now walk away because your worth is no longer up for negotiation. Where you once overextended yourself to feel accepted, you now give from overflow rather than desperation. Where you once held grudges that poisoned your peace, you now release what weighs on your heart without diminishing your boundaries. This maturity grew through heartbreak, disappointment, reflection, and healing. It matured through the nights you questioned everything, through the mornings you chose to rise anyway, and through the decisions that required courage you didn't know you had at the time. Your emotional landscape has widened. You understand the difference between loneliness and solitude. You recognize when your spirit is tired and needs renewal. You know when to speak and when to listen. You feel the shift inside you when something is misaligned. These insights are not random. They are the fruit of every lesson you endured. And while you once feared you weren't growing fast enough, what stands within you now proves that growth was happening consistently, even when you couldn't measure it. This maturity has also transformed your relationships. You no longer cling to connections out of fear. You choose relationships that honor who you are, not who others expect you to be. You communicate from clarity, not anxiety. You understand your boundaries and enforce them without shame. You show love without losing yourself. All of this signals a profound evolution within you. And now, you carry a presence that others feel, a groundedness that wasn't there before, a confidence that doesn't shout but resonates, a wisdom shaped through lived experience rather than wishful thinking. You have entered a level of maturity you once longed for, not because you became perfect, but because you became honest, courageous, reflective, and aligned. And this maturity will carry you through the next chapters with grace, discernment, and strength you can trust. There was a point in your journey when time felt like an opponent, slow when you needed it fast when you wanted time to pause, unpredictable when you longed for certainty. You questioned the pace of your progress, wondering why some doors remained closed, why some breakthroughs needed so many tears to unlock, and why some dreams seemed determined to linger on the horizon. Yet somewhere along the way, Without a dramatic realization or a sudden shift in circumstances, you began to understand something essential. Timing is not your enemy, and delay is not evidence of denial. You learned to trust the cadence of your own unfolding. You noticed how certain things made sense only after you matured into the version of yourself who could hold them without fear. You realized that acceleration without preparation can become a burden instead of a blessing. This awareness didn't silence your desire, but it aligned it. It softens the edges of your impatience and expanded your ability to embrace what is instead of constantly reaching for what is not yet. As you kept growing, you recognized that timing is deeply connected to protection. There were opportunities you once begged for, but looking back now, they would have overwhelmed you emotionally, financially, or mentally. There were relationships you wished would last, yet their departure created space for connections that integrate into your life with more peace, more truth, more reciprocity. There were seasons that moved painfully slowly, yet their slowness gave you the chance to heal layers you didn't even realize were affecting your decisions. What once felt like obstruction eventually revealed itself as orchestration. You began noticing how small alignments led you into greater clarity, conversations that happened at just the right moment, ideas that arrived when you were finally ready to act on them, opportunities that resurfaced only when your confidence had grown strong enough to sustain them. This trust in timing didn't develop because life became easier. It developed because you became wiser. You saw that rushing undermines growth, while patience opens pathways that force cannot unlock. You learned to wait without collapsing into discouragement. You learned to hope without demanding specific outcomes. You learned to recognize that even when time seemed silent, transformation was happening beneath the surface. Trusting timing became a form of peace for you, a peace that now allows you to move through life without the constant anxiety of not enough yet. And now, standing where you are, you see the evidence of that trust everywhere. You feel less desperate. You feel more aligned. You make decisions from clarity rather than pressure. Your heart no longer clings to what isn't ready. It waits with understanding. This is the maturity you once prayed for without knowing how it would arrive. And as you keep moving forward, you'll continue to witness how perfectly everything unfolds when you stop forcing life to match your impatience and start allowing it to match your readiness. There was a time when the unknown terrified you, when every unmarked path felt like a threat rather than an invitation. You carried an inner fear that if you stepped outside your familiar patterns, everything you had worked for would crumble. Instead of seeing possibility, you saw risk. Instead of seeing opportunity, you saw loss. Instead of seeing new beginnings, you saw a lack of control. This fear wasn't irrational. It came from past experiences where you stepped into unfamiliar spaces without support, without guidance, without the emotional foundation you needed. The unknown felt like a void, a place where you imagined yourself unraveling rather than expanding. And yet, life kept nudging you toward new territory, gently but persistently inviting you to trust what you could not yet see. As you confronted challenge after challenge, something in you began to shift. You didn't become fearless overnight, but you began recognizing that uncertainty does not automatically equal danger. You noticed how often unexpected situations brought out strengths you didn't know you possessed. You saw how new circumstances push you toward creativity, resilience, and growth that comfort zones could never offer. You began to understand that the unknown is not empty. It is simply unexperienced. It holds space for transformation, for new relationships, for purpose you haven't yet stepped into, for versions of yourself that are waiting in unrevealed chapters. And slowly, your relationship with uncertainty changed. The unknown no longer paralyzed you. It intrigued you. It expanded your imagination rather than limiting your courage. You learned to walk forward even without perfect clarity, trusting that your wisdom, intuition, and growth would guide your steps. You realize that fear loses its power when you stop feeding it assumptions. You recognize that the unknown becomes less intimidating when you enter it with self-trust rather than self-doubt. Now you make choices that your former self would never have considered. You're willing to transition out of environments that no longer align with your peace, even if the next step is not fully mapped out. You're willing to let go of relationships or roles that shrink you, trusting that something more aligned will emerge. You're willing to explore new opportunities, create new dreams, and take risks rooted in clarity rather than desperation. This courage is not recklessness. It is confidence in your ability to navigate whatever unfolds. The unknown has transformed from a place of fear into a landscape of possibility. And because you no longer tremble before it, you now walk into new seasons with an openness that allows blessings to find you in ways they never could before. There were doors in your life whose closing felt like heartbreak, failure, or rejection. You stood before opportunities that dissolved unexpectedly, relationships that ended without closure, plans that collapsed even after you poured your heart into them. In those moments, you assumed something had gone wrong. You questioned yourself. You questioned your decisions. You questioned the meaning behind the endings that arrived uninvited. The pain of those closures lingered, not only because of what you lost, but because you didn't understand why it happened. You believed that if something slipped from your hands, it meant you weren't enough, or that you somehow ruined your own chances. But as you continued growing, you began to see with clearer eyes. Some doors didn't close because you were unworthy. They closed because what was behind them would have restricted your development. Some connections ended not because you failed, but because staying would have limited your healing or silenced your identity. Some opportunities disappeared because they weren't aligned with the long-term path that was being prepared for you. You couldn't see the larger landscape back then. You saw only the immediate loss. But now, as you look back with maturity, you can trace how each closed door redirected you toward greater alignment. You noticed that every ending made space for something better, even when the transition felt painful. When one relationship ended, your heart grew more honest about what you needed. When one job or role dissolved, you found clarity and courage to pursue something truer to your nature. When plans fell apart, it forced you to rethink your direction with more integrity. Nothing closed without reason. Closure was a form of protection. It was a shield disguised as disappointment. It was guidance camouflaged in grief. Now, you understand that closed doors are not punishments. They are boundaries placed for your good. They prevent you from investing your energy into paths that would have drained your spirit. They stop you from attaching your identity to things that were never meant to define you. They redirect you away from lesser versions of your future and toward something more expansive, more aligned, more sustainable. And the most empowering part is this: you no longer cling to doors that shut. You no longer try to force what isn't meant for you. You no longer chase access to spaces that don't honor your worth. You've learned that the right doors open with ease, not without effort, but without compromise of your peace. The closing of past doors brought you here, and here is exactly where you were meant to arrive. There was a time when your inner dialogue was one of the harshest forces in your life, cutting deeper than anything spoken to you by others. You carried expectations that no one could meet, not even you. Whenever you made a mistake, you magnified it. Whenever you felt emotional, you judged yourself for it. Whenever you struggled, you treated it as a flaw instead of a sign that you were simply human. You didn't realize how often you used your own voice to wound yourself, or how easily you dismissed your pain because you felt you had no right to it. Yet slowly, something began to shift. Through experiences that humbled you, moments that softened you, and reflections that awakened you, You started seeing the harm in how you spoke to yourself. You began understanding that compassion is not indulgence. It is healing. It is strength. It is the foundation of real transformation. And as this understanding took root, the way you treated yourself began changing in profound ways. You learned to sit with your emotions instead of shaming yourself for feeling them. You allowed yourself to rest without accusing yourself of laziness. You forgave yourself for mistakes that once lingered in your thoughts for months. You released the need to perform perfection for people who were never paying attention to your heart. You replaced self-judgment with curiosity. You replaced self-punishment with honesty. You replaced self-blame with responsibility. These shifts didn't make you weaker. They made you whole. Compassion helped you create emotional space you had never known before, a space where you could breathe deeply, think clearly, and grow without fear of internal attack. Through this compassion, you discovered freedom. You stopped defining yourself by your most fragile moments. You stopped allowing your past to dictate who you must always be. You stopped believing that struggle is evidence of inadequacy. You learned that healing doesn't require cruelty. It requires understanding. You learned that growth doesn't require pressure. It requires patience. And you learned that your heart responds far better to encouragement than to criticism. This shift in how you treat yourself is one of the most powerful transformations you've undergone, because it affects everything: your decisions, your relationships, your confidence, and your ability to pursue your purpose without sabotaging your own progress. As you continue into the next chapters of your life, that compassion will serve as your anchor. When you stumble, you will recover quickly. When you feel overwhelmed, you will know how to return to balance. When you doubt yourself, you will speak truth rather than condemnation. You are learning to be on your own side, and that is a miracle in itself. You are discovering that compassion is not something you offer only outward. It is something you owe yourself. And this shift will continue to strengthen every part of your journey. There was a period when you doubted your intuition so deeply that you treated every internal nudge as a suggestion that needed external validation. You second-guessed decisions that were rooted in clarity. You silenced instincts that were trying to protect you. You ignored subtle signs within your spirit because you feared being wrong, being judged, or being misunderstood. You placed more trust in the opinions of others than in the wisdom that was trying to rise from within. Yet through the lessons life presented to you, lessons wrapped in disappointment, confusion, and unexpected revelation, you began to notice something extraordinary. Your inner voice was never against you. It was guiding you. It was warning you. It was revealing truths your mind wasn't ready to articulate. And as you started paying closer attention, your confidence in that inner voice began to grow. You discovered that your intuition speaks through emotions that don't match circumstances, through discomfort that has no logical explanation, through peace that settles in after difficult decisions, through discernment that points out hidden truths before you have evidence. You saw how often your spirit recognized misalignment before your mind caught up. You saw how your inner signals were protecting your future even when your present felt unclear. And slowly, as alignment formed within you, you stopped dismissing your intuition as insecurity or imagination. You started seeing it as wisdom written into your very being. This confidence changed the way you navigate your life. You no longer lean on the loudest voices around you. You no longer require approval before moving forward. You no longer cling to the need for certainty before taking a step. Instead, you move from grounded awareness. You sense when a situation is wrong for you without needing to rationalize it. You feel when a door is meant to be walked through even before the path fully reveals itself. You recognize when someone's presence lifts you or drains you. You understand when to stay, when to separate, when to pause and when to leap. Listening to yourself has given you a power that cannot be taken from you, because it is rooted within. It is not dependent on circumstance, emotion, or external agreement. It grows stronger the more you honor it. And as you keep developing this connection, your decisions will come with clarity, your boundaries will hold with confidence, and your future will unfold with alignment rather than confusion. Your inner voice is not fragile, it's wise. And you are finally trusting it the way you were always meant to. There was a time when shrinking felt safer than rising, when dimming your light seemed easier than shining in your natural brilliance, when staying quiet felt more comfortable than speaking with your full truth. You worried that expanding would make you a target for criticism, that embracing your gifts would set you apart in uncomfortable ways, that stepping into your potential would alienate people who preferred the smaller version of you. And because of this, you held back. You hid your ideas. You minimized your strengths. You softened your presence. You downplayed what made you unique. Not because you lacked desire, but because you feared the cost of standing out. But life kept nudging you, through dissatisfaction, through restlessness, through unshakable inner stirring. It became harder to pretend you were content with limitations that no longer fit. The discomfort of growing began to feel more sacred than the comfort of shrinking. You realized that suppressing your gifts didn't protect you, it suffocated you. That pretending to be less didn't preserve relationships, it distorted them. That staying small didn't prevent disappointment, it amplified it. And slowly, beautifully, you step into expansion. You began allowing yourself to dream without shrinking the scope of your vision. You allowed your voice to carry weight. You allowed your creativity to flourish. You allowed your presence to hold authority. You allowed your potential to rise without apology. This expansion didn't make you arrogant, it made you authentic. It brought you into alignment with the truth of who you were always meant to become. You learned that expanding doesn't mean overpowering others, it means stepping into your God-given design. You learned that growth doesn't require abandonment of humility. It requires the courage to honor your purpose. You learned that expansion is not selfish. It is obedient to the calling placed inside you. And now, as you fully embrace this expansion, something remarkable is happening. The world is shifting in response. Opportunities are aligning with your gifts. Relationships are forming that recognize your value. Clarity is sharpening your decisions. Confidence is rising without force. Expansion has become your natural state, not because you are trying to be more, but because you are no longer settling for less. You have stepped into a fullness that once intimidated you, and now it fits like it was tailored to your soul. And the more you expand, the more the world around you transforms to match the truth of who you are becoming. There is a point in every journey where inner transformation becomes visible, where the years of growth, healing, struggle, endurance, reflection, and perseverance begin shaping the world around you in ways you can finally see. You have reached that point. For so long, your progress was internal. You were building wisdom no one could measure. You were cultivating resilience that didn't have outward proof. You were healing wounds that no one knew existed. You were strengthening emotional muscles that weren't yet being tested. The world saw the same you, but inside, a new you was forming, layer by intentional layer. And now, the shift is finally emerging. Your outer life is beginning to mirror the depth of the work you've done within. You notice it through your decisions, how you choose differently, more intentionally, with greater clarity. You notice it in your emotional responses, how you hold peace in situations that once overwhelmed you. You notice it in your relationships, how you gravitate toward people who honor your growth and distance yourself from those who threaten your peace. You notice it through the opportunities rising before you, opportunities that match your maturity, your values, your purpose. What once felt like endless internal struggle is now becoming external strength. This alignment isn't accidental. It's the natural progression of a soul that refused to give up on itself. It is the harvest of seeds planted in seasons of pain. It is the reward of choosing growth over stagnation. It is the reflection of battles fought in silence. And now, everything you survived is transforming into everything you are becoming. Your life is beginning to take the shape of your growth, not your wounds. Your future is being written by your strength, not your fear. Your decisions are being guided by your truth, not your trauma. This moment, this very moment, is the culmination of everything you've endured, everything you've learned, everything you've surrendered, and everything you've reclaimed. The internal work is becoming visible. The hidden strength is becoming evident. The unseen battles are becoming undeniable victories. And the story of your life is shifting before your eyes because you finally became the version of yourself capable of living the life you were always destined for. Your journey is no longer just preparation. Your journey is now becoming fulfillment. Amen.